everybody. Thanks for joining me. These are the Lawlers in this white Telly. The Mojitones are gone, and the beef is back. So this guitar has been transmogrified magically. Let's see, a couple of things before we get started with the questions. I'm going to try to go faster today. I have to drink more coffee to try to answer more questions. I'm also trying out this gain changer from Barber. More to come on that. I only had about 15, 20 minutes with it right now. Vinicius, I see that you were not been feeling great, possibly COVID, possibly the flu. Take care of yourself. Even just the flu is bad news. And there are questions before my comment at the top saying I'm getting set up. So if you have a question or a comment before that, please put that on here. And everyone do me a favor. It's as more people join these things, which is tremendous and fantastic, it gets harder for me to read it. So if you have a question, please start with a question mark and a space and then the question. It just makes the question pop out a little bit more. So let's get through, start going through it. And if people have questions about the guitar, here it be. Let's see. Paul Johnson. Is it a bad thing to connect one side of the 6-field AC heater run to pins 4, 5, one pin 9? Okay, so you're just saying if you need to maintain absolute polarity between 4 and 5 and 9 on the preamp tubes or 2 and 7 on the power tubes. In one theory, AC is AC and it doesn't matter. In another theory, it does matter and they should all be the same. And other people say, no, you should alternate, then they have cancellation. I've not observed systemic, repeated, predictable, observable variations from that. I do maintain 4 and 5 for all preamp pins and 9 for all the others. So the 4 and 5 are on the string with pin 2 on an octal and 7 on an octal goes with 9 on the preamps. But that's almost just a way of keeping myself paying attention to all the little details. There might be some situation where if that changes, you might have an issue. I've heard people have run into that. I have not. So I think that when it comes to heater stuff like this, have a method, maintain that method, always pay attention to those details because you don't want to have a bad connection on a heater. Let's see, Andy Matt's trying to email me. I will check. I have been drowning in emails, and for every 5 legit ones, there's a couple of hundred spammers or people wanting me to sell you guys video games or partner with them to sell meal kits and all this nonsense. So it's hard to keep up. 1217 Productions 65 Deluxe Reverb makes a subtle feedback ringing on reverb channel with reverb off at low volumes. No tubes or microphonic when I tap on them. Other likely suspects. Haven't pulled the chassis yet. With reverb off, if it's ringing on the reverb channel, feedback ringing. That's an odd one. I would suspect it's not the reverb that's ringing. I would look at some tubes are microphonic, even at frequencies higher than are excited when you tap on them. You may have a bad solder joint somewhere. That's something I would want to do a number of tests if I had it here, but I don't have a pat answer for everyone on that kind of thing. Sorry. Let's see. Are Gemini 1s and 2s worth picking up? Yeah, they're good amps. They have some weirdnesses to them. But if you get one for about $700 and you put $300-400 in repairs into it, if a company were to build one of those for you from scratch, today, off the rack, so to speak, that'd easily be a $2,500, $3,000 amp. And, I like the sound of Geminis, even with some of the weirdnesses. Vinicius, we are all thinking about you. Take care of yourself. Feel better, man. And we all have typos, even as native typers. Hey, Christopher Quine, I saw last week that tightening the stuff on your ViberChamp fixed it. So I'm glad my suggestion was, in fact, useful to you. But that's one of the reasons I did this stream today is that there were so many questions and comments last week that I just didn't get to. And including I saw that, in fact, it was the silver bullet you needed, so that's great. Steve Lou, will I please talk about the slope resistor? What is it? What does it do? How far down this rabbit hole to go? Let's just say this. The tone controls on an amp in a tone stack are fairly crude high and low pass filters, but it's not like the treble affects everything from 800 hertz up, and the mids controls 200 to 800 hertz, and the bass everything below 200 hertz. There's severe overlap between them, and the best way to think of it is that slope resistor presents a fork in the road to the signal. It can go to the treble side, or it can go through the slope resistor to the bass and mid side of things, and then it's all mixed together on the other side. And because of the way the whole circuit works and things being crude and overlap, you're basically saying, I want to send the entire signal full strength to the treble pot, but I want to attenuate the signal being sent to the mids and bass. So the net result is a more useful overlap. The treble becomes more useful. You have less mids and bass. It's like saying, let's put a little slope in there. Let's put a slope in there as part of it. That's why it's called the slope resistor. It gives it part of a notch. If without a slope resistor, the bass and mids would be at least as loud as the treble. You wouldn't have any notch, which we like. So it gives you separation between the mids and bass and the treble. So the lower the value of the slope resistor, say a 33K in some Marshalls, you're not going to have as much of a scoop. You're not going to have as much separation. It's going to be very mid-rangey. You go to 100K like you have in your AC-15 or most Fenders, you're going to have more of a scoop. You're going to have a little more separation. The tone controls will seem to operate more independently to you. There's also a lot of voltage on that resistor, so it can actually affect the sound through adding some distortion in certain circuits. Thanks very much, Brad, for being here and saying all the things like that. And I'm supposed to do things like this. So let's see. Hey, Gringo Pig, I've enjoyed your videos. I just subscribed to Gringo Pig's channel. And he's putting out he doesn't have a ton of content, but it's really good. So if you like guitar, esoterica, and he's a good player, and his videos are well filmed and recorded, check him out and consider giving him a subscription. But definitely go over to Gringo Pig's videos after this and like them all, because that's how people discover our channels. And for those who may wonder about the spelling of Gringo Pig, just like it says on the tin. Hey, Dr. Paul. His thoughts on screen grid resistor wattage in a Fender Princeton with a 1 watt fusible 470 ohm resistor or a 5 watt and a B plus fuse inline holder would be best. Yeah, I don't like using screen grid resistors as fuses, particularly 1 watts, because you can have false failures just because tubes generate a lot of heat. And that resistor, especially if it's mounted like it is on the traditional Fenders, is really close to that socket. You'll notice in my amps that I mount a new 3 watt to the side away from the source of heat. So between the increased wattage and that, it's less likely to be an issue. You can install an HT fuse, in which case typically half amp to 1 amp, depending on the current draw present. And that's what Marshall did. You can also view it as the most likely thing to go wrong in most amps, or usually the thing which goes wrong faster than the mains fuse can react is a heater short, which is usually a heater short to ground or a heater short to B+. From the heater's perspective, B+ is the same as ground, equally bad. That's why you'll see me use half watt fusible or just half watt sacrificial heater balance resistors as opposed to a dedicated center tap. But yeah, if you're building a new amp, I'd put in an HT center tap. It's just on the vintage Fenders where I'm not drilling something into the chassis. Even just a hole to put in an inline fuse holder, a clip in there. I don't like the literal inline fuse holders where it's on the wire with the piggyback stuff. They're sloppy and it's just it's good if that's your only option, but there are better options. Hey, Martin Reed. You had a question last week, Martin. And it was a good question, and I regretted not being able to get to it, but I don't recall what it was now. So if you can remember and put it back in here, I'll get you. I've gotten into I've covered this in other live chats with Jason Tong at Head First and on Tone Talk with Dave Freeman. So I'll give a very, very short version of this. I was a musician. I was an English major. I had gear that when it broke, I couldn't afford to have someone fix it. So I went and got books, and I went to Radio Shack, and I got stuff, and I eventually was able to fix stuff myself, and it just all became very logical to me. I've also done IT work and computer work in general as in my careers, and it's all the same kind of problem solving to me. I just have a knack for it, the same way I can diagram a sonnet, and stuff like that. It's just party tricks. And I taught myself, though, along the way, I got a lot of very important bits of information from Klaus Holm Jensen, or Jensen. I'm not sure how he pronounces that because there's always email and text and stuff in Denmark, and John Suhr, and a few other guys along the way, more in the pro audio end of things than in the amp world. And I'm eternally grateful to them. But they would usually tell me, hey, you need to read this book, or there's a paper on this, or, here's the theory, go experiment and see where that takes you. So it was never tab A into slot B specifics. Let's see, Jimmy John with my sandwich. When hooking up a Fender Princeton reverb to a 212 cab, what are the best practices? Well, Princeton reverb expects an 8 ohm load, and the internal speaker is already 8 ohms. So your external 2x12 should either be an 8 ohm, which you would use instead of the internal 10 inch. So you disconnect the 10 inch internal speaker and connect the 8 ohm 2x12 cab to the main output. Or if you're not pushing the amp, if you're not diming it, but you're running it at like 3 or 4 or 5 to maybe up to 6, that output transformer is actually pretty beefy in a Princeton. You can handle a 8 ohm to 4 ohm mismatch. So you could leave the internal speaker connected and run the 8 ohm 2x12 plugged into the aux jack, and you have a total load of 4 ohms. Princeton would lose a little bit of dB from the less efficient mismatch, but it would gain dB from also having 2 more 12-inch speakers. So you see what you like the sound of best. There's going to be a sonic difference between running the 10 and the 2x12 versus just the 2x12. It should be safe. Even with the reissue, that's a pretty good transformer for that kind of thing. Sergey, I can't say anything about the Laney Cub 12R because I've only had like 5 or 6 of the modern Laneys in, and I don't remember even the model numbers. One was like a Lion, one was a Cub, they're built okay. They're built, let's see, I'd say like the Vox Custom 30 and 15 are here, then the Orange amps are here, and the Laneys are here. The Fender reissues are just below the Laneys, and then Mesa's down here. So yeah, Laneys are okay. I've just never played one where I thought, that sounds fantastic. They sound good, and they're built for the price. Okay. But they're not very popular, at least in this region of the United States, and they cost... they're in a price range where people aren't often wanting to send me those amps from across the country. The old Laneys I've worked on from the 60s and early 70s are very different, but again, they were always like, they were to Marshall what, I guess, PV was to Fender. Just kind of the same idea with some places where they save money, obviously. Hey, Matt Scott down in New Orleans. I need to get down to New Orleans soon. I miss it. Hey, Raf. Hello from Philly. Am I still satisfied with the combo Faber Bridge Post Tone Pros ABR1 bridge? Actually, I love the Faber Bridge Posts, but because I have the Maestro Vibrola on my SG, the Tone Pros locking did not help do me any favors. The Tone Pro locking made the string bind at the saddle and go forward and ping. So while I kept the Faber bridge post, you can see a later video on that SG. I went to a Faber bridge without locking, put on some domed saddles like they used back in 63, 64, where the thumb wheels on the posts have domed tops, so the bridge rocks back and forth just a small amount, a lot less than it rocked in various random directions at once with the stock setup with the Nashville post that had so much slop. But that way, instead of the string moving over the saddle and potentially going, one wind past where it was as you use the bar, and then locking there with the locking bridge, the entire saddle flexes, so the witness point of the string with its winds at the saddle stays the same. I don't get that pinging. If I were using a non-maestro, like a standard Les Paul, the Tone Pros would have been, ABR1 bridge would have been fine. That said, I also have the Faber locking bridge, which locks from the top rather than a little set screw from the side. So it locks with even pressure and doesn't move the bridge, and it's much more elegant than the Tone Pros. So it's a more expensive bridge because it's made in Germany, and it's a higher quality bridge than the Tone Pros. So look at the Faber locking system. If locking's in something you're interested in, I think it's worth it. I think it's a nicer bridge than the Tone Pros, but the Tone Pros does work. Hey, Jeff, I was just watching your video on pentatonic creativity, and I'm like, I need to practice that, but no, I got a live stream. I don't think I'm going to practice for you guys. I will say, Jeff, that while I love you, and I love everything that you give us, that 60 cycle buzz in that video was something fierce on that red Strat today, much higher than I'm getting here. So I don't. And it seems higher than it is with your other Strat. Your was it a 64? I'm OCD about sound, which helps. It's actually a benefit in my job. But I was like, wow, he's playing great, man. That's so much buzz. And then you'd roll your volume down and be like, couldn't hear what you're playing, but it sounded great. I'm partially kidding, but at the same time, the red one seems to be noisier than your Sunburst. New York City geology. And AC-15 one already sounds like a Marshall. If you set it right, but it's not going to sound like a JCM 800. It's going to sound like it's going to sound more like a bright Plexi. There's a lot of similarity to the circuit. You could also use the normal channel instead of the top boost channel and use a host of pedals. The AC-15 is a better sounding amp and better built amp than the DSL 20 or 40. The DSL 40 CR just is every flavor combination for most. For like I've said in the videos, if you're a cover band and you need to get a whole bunch of sounds, not any of them have to be perfect or great, but all of them have to be good. I think the DSL 40 CR is great, but I think the AC-15C is a much better built and sounding amp in general. Look at the Friedman pedals. He's got so many really good sounding Marshall pedals, Marshalls in a box, all kinds of stuff. And don't be afraid to try your normal channel. I mean, here is a Telecaster into that 66 Bandmaster. Doesn't sound anything like a Marshall. Here's the gain changer. I'm going to go to the gainiest stuff it can do. Turn it up with some snarl. That probably won't come through here very well, but this is not the right guitar for that. This is not the right amp for that. That's not what this pedal is designed to do. But, that's getting more towards Marshall. So try the Friedman stuff. you can try the little SL thing that is it exotic? It makes the SL Marshall in a box thing. But the right pedal into your AC15 will get you there for most people's juices. Hey, D. Yamarev. My thoughts on running an amp with a 4-ohm only output transformer into an 8-ohm cab permanently. Will it harm the amp? I don't want to replace the output transformer. I don't know what the amp is, and it's going to depend on the quality of the transformer, but it's really not a good idea to have that as a permanent setup. I would, and is it a 8-ohm cab because it's 2 speakers or 4 speakers? You might be able to rewire the cab to get a 4-ohm or load. So unless you've got something that's just bulletproof, say like I don't know, if you have an amp that's high enough quality to have a really robust transformer, then it deserves to have the right match. And a 4-ohm only output is usually in the realm of like a Champ or something, so I'd be careful about that. Hey, Mike, you talk some stuff we talked about on Tone Talk, and that's the response of the traditional AC15 circuit, which has the output transformer after the choke. So the output transformer primaries are on the same node as the screen. And in that amp, you get a sort of clean feedback because the transformer, because the output transformer does a saturation thing. It's really hard to describe. You would have to have one AC15 with a choke before the output transformer and the other one with a choke after. That was the only variable. But there's a compression thing that happens there. But there are a lot of stages in an amp that can be tweaked to get that clean feedback thing. If I were to turn this Vibrolux up, it would do it just Telly straight into it. But I can't do that at the volumes that this mic will be happy with for this stream. I would love to talk about this in depth, but that would be like an entire video just on that. Hey, Dragutin. I would not describe modern production power tubes because I have no idea how they're made. It is beyond my pay grade. Pros in general of current production tubes are that they don't cost $200 each. Cons are that they don't always last, and but sometimes they do last. So I'd rather have a $45 tube that lasted 2 years than a $400 tube that lasted 4 years. That may not be the answer you're looking for, but that's what I've got. Let's see. OB77, hey, he's got a 79 Princeton reverb converted back to blackface specs with a GZ34 tube. High frequencies are obnoxious. The string noise is like ice picks to the ears. Thoughts, bias, tone cap. I don't know what speaker you have. I don't know what tubes it has. I don't know if it was properly reverted to the AA864 circuit. I don't know. There are too many there are too many variables there for me to say it's this. But the traditional Princeton reverb is not a very bright amp. It doesn't have a bright cap. In fact, it can be a little bit dark. Hey, Steverloo, I did answer your question about the slope resistor. To everyone, please not only put a question mark before your question so I can see that it is a question, but only ask once, please, because I will get to it. But if the same questions repeat, it's harder for me to find the new questions. Let's see. Twin 65 reissue, intermittent vibrato channel. Oh, okay. So if your solder joints are okay on the pot, but the moving the pot makes it cut out, it may be one of two things. Number one, if you're lucky, that pot has the internals in a case. And if you look at the front of it, which is up against the chassis right now, there are 2 prongs on either side of the case, which are kind of clamping everything together, clamping the wafer board. If those become loose or bent over time, then the wafer can move, which means that the wiper can lose contact internally in the pot. And if that's the case, you just press on it with a flathead screwdriver or the right pliers and clamp it back, and it all tightens up, in which case that doesn't happen. Pardon me. That's best case. Worst case is you have a little break. Sometimes there's a hairline fracture, either on the board, which has the track on it, or on one of your solder lugs. So even if it's soldered, it's not connected. But most of the time, when you have that kind of symptom, it's the wafer is loose physically, and you just clamp the case back together. Hey, Travis. As I mentioned before, I don't add HT fuses to vintage amps without a lot of thought or minimal change. You'll see I've added them to some JMI AC30s because there'll be an existing screw hole where I can put a fuse holder in there for that. And I think it's a good thing for that. But generally, HT fuses are... it depends on the rectifier circuit. Some of them are before, some of them are after. In general, I would do it after the rectifier. But let me think about that for a second. Yeah, I would do it after the rectifier, before the filter cap. Thanks, Mark Spurgeon. I appreciate that. Let's see. Yeah, the JJ636's JDS can be really microphonic in any combo. In theory, they've got a new dual mica that's kind of fixed that, but I've not tested it yet. Hey, Kimball. No, I'm sorry. The Fender Excelsior is a really, really poorly built amp, and it's essentially a 5E3 Deluxe design that they ruined with a stupid change here and a stupid change there, and they could have just made 5E3 Deluxe PCB version, small thing, really nice for very little money, but instead they made all those changes, which make it not as nice. I mean, the tone stack's horrible. And they decided to make it cosmetically different with the split chassis and power down here and preamp up here, and it's just a stupid thing to do. Whenever someone's doing added complications just for the sake of looks, I give them the side eye. You're introducing all these problems for no benefit, and for the same price or less, they could have done a real simple little 4-tube 5E3 clone for $400 without any complications, and everyone would be like, "Oh my God, Fender's back!" But no, they did a pawn shop series because it was designed to be marketing. And I think it's the same era as when they're putting speakers in Volkswagens with Fender on the dash and a sunburst finish. And I drive a Volkswagen Golf, and I love my Volkswagen Golf, but it doesn't have the Fender edition. Okay, Drag, continue. The quality. There are good and bad modern power tubes. It's going to depend on what you need. If you need 6 V6s for combos, like we just mentioned with the JJs, it can be a little more problematic. For EL34s, you generally have a wider range, especially in EL84s used in heads where you don't have the mechanical vibration issues. But I'm pretty pleased with the current state of power tubes, as long as you don't expect them to last 20 years. They're not going to, or very few of them will. Hey, Guitar Man, I appreciate the compliment there. The overheating issues with the JTM30. The JTM30 and the JTM60 are the worst amps Marshall ever made as far as the way they are built and what happens to them predictably with heat. The Origin might be the worst sounding, but the JTM is not... What's the best way to put it this way? Every JTM 30 and 60 that comes in has burned or is burning its rectification diodes or rectification bridge. I always mount a 6 amp or 8 amp on the chassis and run wires from that chassis mounted bridge back to the board, and then I have to undo heat damage on the board. But they have this little plastic slider rail where the board slides in, it just so, and it vibrates and it gets loose, and they have all these flimsy flying wires everywhere. So you can do the rectifier, the bridge rectifier bolted to the chassis for heat sinking, like I mentioned. But in general, I think it's just a really unreliable amp. There's nothing about it that's built well. You might want to move on to something else. It was what it was, and it mostly isn't what it wasn't, if that makes sense. Hey, John Gallant, thanks for joining me. I don't have any info on Webb or Standell amps, Clyde Broadway, sorry. Hey, Lefty Mike, maybe Brad's already answered it because I'm a bit late, but Vintage 30s, he finds it fizzy with this high gain rev. The Vintage 30's got a spike around 2 kilohertz, which some people love and some people hate. And it's why the amp has a great clean sound for a lot of styles, but it can also make things kind of, I describe it as, oh, there's the Dokken thing. So if you don't like the sound of that Vintage 30, get a different speaker. Vintage 30's got that spike. G12H30 does not. G12H30 has some other characteristics. The GT75 has worse fizz, So recommending speakers is like recommending boyfriends and girlfriends. That's Danger Will Robinson territory, interfering in something that subjective. I can tell you when things are well built or not well built, and I can tell you when things are almost universally a bad pairing, like the C12K in a Fender reissue. But I don't think there's anything you can do to your rev to make it play better with that notch or spike rather in the response of a Vintage 30. Hey, John Gallant. Sorry, I'm like I keep saying, I'm way behind on emails, but I'll save you some time. I have absolutely no interest in working on any more Silvertone 1484s. I've got one here to finish up, and that's it. I just don't like them. I don't think they're worth putting money into, and I don't want to do that. And I know that other guys will be delighted to. But as far as replacement tubes for Deluxe Reverb reissue, find a vendor that you like and trust. And right now, even the good vendors are still having stock issues. I just put from Tube Depot, I got some new preamp tubes for the 66 Super Reverb, and I chose the Electro-Harmonix 7025 for that because it was the best thing available they had in stock right now, because a lot of this stuff is still not available. But the Electro-Harmonix silver font, silver typeface 7025 is a much better tube than the yellow typeface 12AX7. So that's one I quite like. I like the TAD red bass 7025s when they're available from different vendors. I don't mind the TAD Select Premium regular 12X7s or ECC 83s. And, from a good vendor, there's nothing wrong with the JJ ECC 83, not the gold-plated, just the regular one. But JJ's, I'm not sure if it was just a batch or a period of production, but a lot of times the JJ's will prematurely lose vacuum. It'll be like, brand new tube, put it in the amp, everything's fine. 10 minutes later, it's lost vacuum. So I'm not sure what's up with that or how consistently that's a problem now. I've not seen it in a few months, but for a while there, it seemed like it was every other JJ. But the JJs, when they don't go white, they sound really good typically. What Matt Fields is saying here, I often will seek out a new old stock tube if there's one that I know is cost effective. For instance, for a 12AT7 Tube Depot, maybe I shouldn't say this so I have more available for me, but they've got a whole lot of JAN, Joint Army Navy, new old stock surplus 12AT7s that were made by Philips in the 70s, and they're only like $35. So, that's a much better tube than you get in a current Tungsol or Electro-Harmonix or Sovtek or anything. So where I'm not paying, when the client's not being bent over for new old stock, I'll do new old stock. But yeah, the trouble is there's the tube itself and there's the tube in the physical world, the material world. And so you can get your amp and put a whole bunch of $200 to $400 Mullard, new old stock, everything in it, and drive it to the gig and hit a pothole. And, you know, that $400 old Mullard will die from the same pothole that takes out a $40 JJ. So depends on what you're doing with it. In the studio, never moving, sure, go for Mullards, go for Brimars, go for Amperex, go for RCAs. If you're gigging with it and a JJ does the trick, go with the JJs for gigging, et cetera, et cetera. Hey, Alan McDonald, thanks for joining us. Hey, Matt. So, yeah, the Electroharmonics, the tongue saw, and the TAD 6v6s are usually much better as far as microphonics than the JJ. And it's specifically the JJ 6v6. Some of their other tubes, like the 34s, are probably some of the most reliable ones on the market. I've had a couple of premature failures with the tongue saw and the TAD though. Not too many, but when they do happen, it's just like, what the hell? So, you know, the other day in that, I posted a video on that 72 Deluxe Reverb. The red bass TADs in there were only about a month and a half old, and they were toast. One of them, the white lettering had gone gray. That was the one that had the noise. But I have a suspicion that it's vendor related, and the better tube vendors get the stuff that goes to a higher level of Q&A, because the distributor doesn't want to deal with all the returns that a better vendor will be sending their way. Hey, Jimmy Mack, thank you very much. Appreciate that. On the 5E3 build, which is upcoming, I am going to do tweaking the circuit, and I will be doing a layout which is mostly Leo's layout with a few variations which are very important, and we'll talk about them, because sometimes three little changes can have a huge effect for good or ill. So I will be talking about what I'm doing, why, when it's the same as Leo's, when it's different, and why, as we go through that process. So that will be coming soon, hopefully. Hey, Goose Chase Music. He's been dabbling in soldering, struggling to make his wiring on a FGN guitar neat. Any tips for tidying up wiring for body-mounted humbuckers with one volume, one tone, and a double pole sort of three-way switch on a pick guard? I don't have specific pointers, but unless you're expecting to change the pickups a lot and sell the pickups that are in the guitar, you don't want to have excess wiring. And I've got playlists on my channel, one of which is guitar wiring. So look through there and see how I've approached things. But I think good wiring always ends up being neat wiring. Even if you're not doing it for visual aesthetics, it ends up looking that way. Even just a little Telecaster wiring I put up the other day, just showing, you've got a bus wire here. That's a great place to put ground, so you don't have to have a whole bunch of piles of solder on the back of a volume pot. But I don't have anything more specific than that. But look through my guitar wiring playlist and see if I have anything out there that might give you some aha moments. I'm not the only person who does this by far. There are a lot of channels that do guitar wiring. I will say there are a lot of luthiers out there, guitar techs, who do much better woodworking and frets than I do, but some of their soldering, yikes. I won't name names. That's not fair. But is the Rick 12-string double truss rod easy to adjust? It is easy to adjust in a non-seized Rick, but it is not something that I think, and I mean this nicely. I mean, I'm being your friend here, Paul Johnson. I'm not putting you down the slightest. If you have to ask that question, I don't think you're ready to do a Rick 12-string with a double truss rod, because there are tricks to it and there are considerations, there are things you have to bear in mind and measurements you need to take before, during, and after. And if you break that truss rod, you are in a world of financial hurt. And it is not expensive to take a RIC 12 to a good tech and have them do that kind of thing, or show you all the things that I can't show you here, from however many hundreds of thousands of miles away from you. So if that's the question that you're asking, I'm going to say no. It is very difficult to take it to a tech, and they can show you how simple it can be, but what you have to be aware of. Because I don't want to say, yeah, man, go. Here's how you do it, and then have you break your $4,000 guitar. Hey, Matt, appreciate that. Which Irish pub in New Orleans? Is that the one over on Magazine, or is that the one over at just south of Frenchman's area? Let's see. All right, so Keat NZ, or NZ, depending on where you are, or Keatons. JCM 800, 2203, KK, I don't know what the KK is. Wants to change out the KT88s for EL34s. You won't need to make any changes electronically to the amp to do that. You have to make sure the bias is correct, and there's some things which differ between the KT88 version and the EL34 version as far as screens and the grid leak resistors or bias leak resistors in the phase inverter, and sometimes the bias circuit. But if you get all that adjusted, at that point, does it need adjusting? No. You'll probably end up finding, hey, I like the way the mids are a little bit better here than there or whatever. But there's nothing that you need to change in the circuitry. You just might end up setting this knob at 4 instead of 5. Is it okay to run a 5U4 GB and 5081s in a Fender basement reissue? Voltages are near original values. Yeah, the output transformer can handle the increased current of the 5U4 GB, and the 5U4 GB will just drop the voltage a little bit more. You'll have a little less P+. You'll need to rebias it. Unless you're spending an awful lot on those 5081s, most 5081s today are just relabeled 6L6s, and you won't have there's no difference at all between the current 30-watt 5881s and a 30-watt 6L6. The old 23 or 24-watt 5081s are not being made anymore, as far as I know. And if you have some new old stock ones, they're pretty expensive. I will say that my favorite output tubes in a baseband reissue are the 6L6 GC STRs, either by a tube amp doctor or tongue saw, if you can find them, because the shorter bottle tube holds up a lot better in that combo, and those things move a lot of air. And I think they sound right, and they don't become microphonic. 5U4 versus 5AR4 / GZ34. It's almost a taste what you like the sound of, higher or lower B+. In a current reissue, you can run either just fine. In an older amp, sometimes it's nice to run the 5U4 to get a voltage drop so your B+ doesn't creep up on the ratings of the filter caps with modern wall voltages. But the power transformer in that reissue is really good and really hefty, and will not notice or mind the additional rectifier heater current at all. Thanks, Chris B. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was that solid state Marshall 100 watt, and talk about Hail Marys. We've changed out the entire board on his. It was a TSL 100, because the Marshall first 17 or 20 revisions of that board caught on fire, but we got him a revision 21 or whatever it was, and that one didn't catch on fire. But all the others burnt down, fell over, and sank into the swamp. But the 21st amp stayed, and that's what you'll be getting, my boy. Hey, Chris Butler. Give some chugs. I'm not quite sure how that faux Van Halen thing here came through the speakers there. So I don't think I'm gonna be doing any more chugging with this setup. But if I were to turn that amp up, because that amp's below 3 on the volume, if I turn that volume up to 4.5, this amp transforms a 66 bandmaster, and this is this little game changer is a really good pedal, but it's designed for very light to medium overdrive. The Friedman pedal would be a totally different situation here. I like this pedal a lot. I'm thinking about getting one. I'll do a review of this soon, but if I get one, it will be the red or the black, because this kind of desert green, I don't know, I think it clashes with my outfit. Let's see. Fender Ludwig. No, the Supersonic can either be quiet and be a good amp, or it can have an effects loop. The Bassman Burnside. Both the Vibrolux and the Bassman side can sound good. The trouble with it is they have a shared tone stack. So if you switch the channels, you got to change all your settings. So it's not really something you can change live. I'm not a fan of the Supersonic. I know that people love it. They've got a noisy effects loop. They've got a noisy reverb. They've got two drastic different voicing options, which means that you can't have a set and forget tone stack. There's no Goldilocks condition for that amp to be in. It's not really Goldilocks, I suppose. There's a Baby Bear that was just right, which sounds creepy. We'll stop talking about that. Hey, Jeremy Brainerd. He loves the big, warm, full, clean sound of a Fender Twin. He's looking for a head or combo with half or less of the volume and quality construction. Thoughts? Sonic model? No Sonic models coming out on that kind of thing for a long while. I don't know what your budget is. If your budget can be around $1,600 to $2,000, depending on used versus new, I think you're describing the Sir Bella. I'm not sure if that comes in a head, but I know it comes in the combo, which is phenomenal. You could also get a deluxe reverb reissue, probably for around $1,000 to $1,100 used. And I've pretty much publicly given away the reliability mods on those and how to add a mids pot and a deluxe reverb with the mids pot added on the back, so you can turn the mids way down from 7K to like 1 to 2K as needed. We'll get that kind of sound you're describing at 22 watts, so that's less than half the volume. Actually, it's not. It's less than half the wattage. It's volume versus wattage is a tricky thing. Half the volume of an 85 watts speaker amp like that is an 8 or 10 watts amp, but you could, that Bandmaster I've been playing through is quite a bit less output than a Twin, and it's a head. If you had a reverb pedal, you can get the Bandmasters on reverb, the heads from the 60s even, for like $1,400 sometimes, in good condition. So it depends on your budget. But you could get a silver face or black face Bandmaster head, or even brown, for under $2,000. Maybe put $400 into getting it restored and have something phenomenal. And then if you needed reverb, add reverb through a pedal. There's a lot of good pedals in the world today. Hey, Eric, I'm sorry. I love the Vibro Champ. I just, the little stock speakers are what they are. I think the Fat Jimmy C1025 is a great speaker. Fat Jimmy speakers are actually made for Fat Jimmy, two Fat Jimmy specs by Warehouse, so you and I are on the same page. I don't think that the tone circuit needs any modifications on a Vibro Champ. The one thing I'll sometimes do on a Vibro Champ is the schematic is 20 microfarad, 20 microfarad, 20 microfarad on the filtering. Sometimes I'll get, I'll I'll use a different can cap, so I can have 20 microfarad for the reservoir, then 40 microfarad on the screen, and then another 20 for the preamp, and that gives additional filtering without putting a big load on the rectifier tube, just for a little bit quieter operation. And if you want a little sparkle, you can put a small bright cap on the volume pot, but beyond that, I wouldn't make any changes to it. I think a 68 Vibrochamp is a beautiful thing, especially through a better speaker than the stock one. Hey, Brendan, yeah, I would avoid the AC4 series, either the current C1 or the old TV series. I just think they're bad jokes. And I say that having restored and played many JMI AC4s, which are very different sounding things. I just don't think the AC4 is a good amp in any modern incarnation. And for the money, you could get... I mean, this sounds like I'm making a put down, and I'm not. I would, for the money and what you need it to do, I would much rather have a Boss Katana than the overpriced AC4 TV or the underbuilt AC4 C1. So maybe I'm the wrong person to ask, but no, I think they're badly built and they sound bad, and they overpromise. Hey, Treason, you're very welcome for any help I've been able to give you. I would not steer you away from either Little Sister or a Runt 20. My thoughts are you need to play them because they're different amps, and one of them will speak to you more. Beyond that, you're on the path. Matt Fields is agreeing with me about the Sir Bella. I like it when people agree with me. I find it agreeable. Don't you agree? Right on cue. Hi-Fi Blast Dumont is disagreeing with me about the AC4, but I'm right. Hey, again, NYC Geology. Why do you think modern guitar building is at a point where we can get consistent, good quality guitars for much less in the past, while amps in the same relative price point are so shoddy? I reject your premise. I reject your premise, and I'll give some spoilers for some upcoming videos. I have an Epiphone Casino, sells for $700. Has a lot of things about it that are very good. The nut was way high and really square. And the guitar played out of tune on the bottom 5 frets. It had linear taper pots. I mean, nominally CTS, but the cheap 24 millimeter linear taper. A terrible switch. And upgraded Epiphone Pro pickups, and these things are dark and honky and are going away. And the bridge and studs, much like the Gibson current production, had a bunch of wiggle where the metal inserts wiggled in the body inserts and the bridge wiggles on that. So, and then it had a really crappy output jack with no tooth washer, and the pots had no tooth washers, so the hardware was locked in. So $700, you pretty much have to replace all this or get it tightened. The switch was terrible. The pickups still are terrible. The bridge wasn't great. The nut needed serious work to be playable. $700. $850 is what the list on that Yamaha RevStar that came in. And aside from the wiring changes, which I suggested, which were totally optional, and you could just use positions 1, 3, and 5, that guitar was almost flawless at $850, so that supports your argument. Then I did lower the nut slots a tiny bit just because they were quite good and I wanted them perfect for the owner. And I have a Squier bass here that was $430, and that P bass had a lot of minor issues. It just wasn't great. And I played a PRS DGT SE that I was expecting it to be great, and 95% of it was really great for the price or any price, and I think $900 list. But it had some serious, serious bad issues with the fretwork and the fingerboard finishing. And I was shocked at how bad those things were. So I don't think that we're truly in the golden age because everything has gone up so much in price that the $700 guitar and the $850 guitar and the $900 guitar, the Yamaha, the Epiphone, and the PRS. 3 years ago, those were all $400 to $500 guitars, and the quality's pretty much the same as the $400 to $500 guitars from 2 or 3 years ago. I think most channels way overinflate how good current production inexpensive guitars are. I will say that the Yamaha RevStar is the particular outlier there, where they're really fantastic, and they've got a $500 version, which is, if you want the humbuckers and are fine with just one or two finishes, really great. But they are by so much better than the Harley Bentons of the world or the Epiphones, and I think the PRS SE, it's going to depend on the individual guitar. Some are going to be closer to the Yamaha, some are going to be closer to the Squier. Squier, depends on the affinities or garbage. Some of the classic vibes are okay, but and some individual ones are great, but it's rare. Whereas amps, it's amazing that I could go buy a Boss Katana for $300 and get all that. As a beginner guitarist or someone who wants a practice amp, it's phenomenal. The AC15 custom C1, get one used for $450, $500. It's phenomenal. If you were to take that Yamaha for $800 and a brand new AC15 for $800 and a $1,600 rig, and you adjust for inflation, in any decade, that is a rig that people would have been jealous of for a long time. I think the amps are there and the guitars are there, but not all the amps are as bad as you've been told, and not all the guitars are as good as you've been told. And I went on way too long on that, so I'm going to answer two more questions, and we're going to take our first 7-minute intermission. So what do I think about the Blackstar HT Blackstar 3? I've not tried the HT Blackstar 3, but I'm not a fan of the 1 or the 2. And I don't think that they're going to change their stripes, so to speak. Wade Guiche? I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Thank you very much. Do you see any issues adding a switchable 40% ultralinear tap to a set of cathode-biased 5881s? Huh. I don't know. I don't know that I've ever encountered a cathode-biased ultralinear setup. It seems that they work at cross purposes. I don't think that you get any real benefit, because I think the advantages that ultralinear can give you, as far as headroom and breakup and greater swing, are going to be wildly offset by the cathode bias choice. So ultralinear is one direction as far as design and costs, and cathode bias is the other direction. Either can be fantastic. I'm not sure if there's any benefit to combining them, but maybe someone in the comments will have a better idea on that. We're going to come back in about 7 minutes, and we'll get to Red Z's question. In the meantime, we will come back in 7 minutes, everybody. David Grissom is holding on line 1. Huh. I'll get to that, Slick Salmon. Dave's got my number, though. I don't know if I still have his, but he's got mine. Let's see. I don't have any thoughts on sundown combos. I'm sorry to say, Mr. Red Z. I've heard good things about them from some people and heard bad things about from others, but I have no experience of them myself. Sorry. All right, Kenichi's got a 64 AMI. I'm sorry, JMI. Sorry, I've been in Beatles mode. JMI, Vox AC30. Whoa, just a second. I'll get to that, Slick Salmon. Dave's got my number, though. Shh. I don't know if I still have it. Stop. Let's see. I'm so high tech. All right. Is it okay to keep the screen at 100 ohm and grid stoppers 1.5K? It is okay to do that, but you'll run the risk of the output tubes not liking it. You're definitely going to want to keep the mains AC down at what the amp is expecting. And depending on where you live, that 50 hertz in Europe, UK versus 60 hertz here matters. So you're going to want to find whichever voltage, whichever tap you use. Sometimes with a Variac or other thing, brown box, whatever have you. You're probably going to want to set so that your heaters are heater pins are about 6.2 volts AC as opposed to 6.3. And don't dime the amp for long periods of time, in which case you can get away with the 100 ohm and the 1.5K. The 1.5K I only increase to keep the reaction of the tube the same when I increase the screen grids. Now, note that Brian May increases his screen grids. I think he's using 270 ohm, 3 watts, and a lot of people use 470K. I find that 1K screen grids it gives the best protection for current production tubes with modern wall voltages across the models. But if you want to stick with 100 ohms, and be aware that they may wear out because that's a lot of current to dissipate, especially in a half watt or 1 watt resistor, depending on what's in your amp. It's a calculated risk that you need to take, but if you do that, make sure that you're not running the heaters over 6.3 volts. And I'd say 6.2 would be a pretty good target. And, your mileage hopefully will not vary too much beyond that. Let's see. And Matt makes an important point. I've made this in other things. If you look at the cost of a hand-wired boutique amp, it's about the same price as what Fender charged in 1964 and 1965 once you adjust for inflation. In fact, a lot of us who have done that have to make less money per amp than Fender did, because Fender was making 100 deluxe reverbs a week at scale, and we make 10, but we're trying to make some $2,800 price point, $3,500 price point. That's what Fenders went for new back in the day. Fenders were always expensive. Marshalls were really expensive. Gibsons were really expensive. Fenders were expensive. We see, it's only $300. Wow, that was cheap. No, that $300 back then is $3,000 now. Okay, so all right, he's got a YGL3. I wouldn't run them at 4 ohms. If you have let's see. Yeah, you don't have a good option there because you could wire the cabs each at no. That's pretty much all you can do with 2x12s, unless you did something really crazy, which would involve intermingling the cabs in strange ways. So yeah, you're probably okay with the transformer in a YGL3, but Yeah, because any other solution as far as adding resistance just as a passive resistance for the load would affect the power outage as well. So you're probably okay. Just don't dime the damn thing, and you'll probably be okay. Oh, if I were in my 20s today, my goal was to become a professional amp tech, I would not do it. I don't mean this to be mean, but I think I'm probably one. I'd say Brad. He's in his 30s. Is probably the last guys who could expect to have a long career in this. And Brad's got enough other skills with solid state and the guitars and woodworking that he can move on to other things. I think we're probably 20 years away from the end of tube availability. I'd love to be wrong about that, but I think you don't want to focus on tube amps if you're going to do that. Do it if you love it. Do it if it's an interesting hobby. Do it for yourself, and if you get good at it, then do work for friends. But I would not set out to become a professional amp tech in this day and age. I think that setting yourself up to be a buggy maker in 1895, you may be the best coach builder in the world, but guess what? I don't mean to be morbid or discouraging. You've got a 65 variable X with original C10 and a speaker. Sounds very mid-forward, which your Texas are very unusual. C10N has got a pretty good scoop for a mid-range speaker, but it's still a relatively small cab. The thing I would look at, and your tech probably already has, is make sure that the mids resistor in the Vibrolux hasn't just gone through the roof, like the mids on that Bandmaster. The vibrato channel sounded, the amp just had no high-end response, and it was really boxy mid-rangey. The nominally 6.8K resistor had drifted like to 18K, which really threw off the entire sound. You could have a couple little things like that happening in the amp, and the end result is boxy. But the only way to know for sure is to play that amp into a different set of speakers, or to play a different set of speakers, different amp through those speakers. But in general, C10Ns would be a beautiful, fairly scooped sound for a 2x10 and a Vibrolux. I have not had a chance to look inside of an Amplified Nation amp, Mergen. Sorry. I look forward to being able to see one at some point, but someone has to have one that needs service in this area, and most of them are probably new enough that they're going to go back to warranty rather than going to a guy like me for repair. I do warranty stuff for some companies, but no one from Amplified Nation has reached out to me. Let's see. All right, John Pearson has a Marshall Hendricks JH100 amp. It is basically a 45 preamp he measured the B plus, and it's running at 545 volts. Does this sound right? Yep, that sounds about right. That would be the JH100 with the Monterey, basically, the Monterey version of that amp, 1967. That's about right, or that's in the ballpark. Marshall was always making changes from amp to amp, and once they got away from tube rectification, they could use much higher plate voltages and use a much larger number of output tubes, and they started to play around with it to see. It was been an exciting time to be an amp designer, because for the first time, diodes were really common and inexpensive, because you weren't using germanium anymore, you're using silicon. And so you would not be tied to having to use a tube rectifier, so you could have more voltage, more power, and then more tubes, more watts, and see what you could do. Fender was still very much at that time chasing Leo Fender's concept of what a perfect amp should be, which was very inspired by Western swing and clean and high headroom. But Marshall, they were pretty much trying to keep Pete Townsend happy. back when he could hear what sounds he was making, and then guys like Hendrix and Clapton, et cetera, et cetera. So they were really at the forefront of design from 65 to 72. Really exciting times, and some of their ideas were pretty wild. And didn't last very long, but they learned things. But yeah, you can have high B pluses in that era of Marshall. I went on too long. Sorry. I need to remind myself to keep things going. Thank you very much for the comment on the AC15 tweaks there. Hi-Fi Blast Duman. Let's see. Is cranking a plexi to 10 and then turning down the volume with the post-phase inverter master volume still pretty hard on the power tubes? No. If you have a master volume in the Marshall, you turn it down, your power tubes are going to be working like you have the preamp down low. And the preamp tubes don't really wear out from being turned up. It doesn't matter to them at all. The only issue is if you have a old plexi and you have everything cranked and then you run into an attenuator to reduce the level coming out of the power tubes to the speakers, that's when you're going to be killing your power tubes without cause. So master volumes can be wonderful things in moderation. Hey, Chris McKinney. Yeah, I use the silver mod caps, and I've had no problems with them. There was a bad batch of the 20 microfarad 500 volts kind of early on in the production, but they seem to fix that, and I've not had any bad ones. And you can look at the Super Reverb amp, the 66 Super Reverb from the other week. I put in. I know I use the filter caps for that, and the Bandmaster. I use the silver MODs. And I know that I think in the Bandmaster I use the cathode bypass caps as well. I think in the Super I use the Viciers. I do prefer the Viciers for a couple of reasons, but some of it is just because they come in a 4.7 microfarad value as well, which I like to use on the vibrato channel on V5B. And so then I can have all my cathode caps match each other cosmetically. How long have the NATO straps tickled your fancy? You got to be careful asking me about these watch questions, because I will go off on a tangent about watches. This is actually not a NATO. This is it's a single pass, so it doesn't have the bulk of the NATO. This is a RAF strap. This is the Connery pattern RAF strap on this field watch, the Hamilton, and I like it because it's comfortable, but I don't have all that excess fabric piled up on the side like I do with NATOs. And it doesn't set the watch that far off my wrist. And I promise the rest of you that's enough watch stuff for now. But yeah, that's one of my other passions. I was talking to Keith Williams, 5 Watt World, about this the other day. He's also down the watch rabbit hole. And he's like, we can do the watches of 5 Watt World and Sonic Audio. I'm like, yeah, all 10 people will love that, Keith. But, that'd be a cool video for us to, and the 10 people who'd follow. Yeah, Matt raises a good point on the C10Ns. Yeah, if it's broken in, if it's wearing out, it's not going to have the high end that it originally did. But I don't think that they're really a mid-heavy speaker compared to other 10 inches. The C10N generally is a pretty scooped 10-inch speaker. But again, like I said before, play that amp into other speakers and other amps through those speakers, and you'll know where the issue lies. Thanks, Hi-Fi. Appreciate that very much. Oh, it gets complicated in New York City geology about amp prices and guitar prices. More guitarists are willing to pay more for a guitar than they are willing to pay more for an amp. That's just how it is. People will want to have, a Murphy Labs 59 custom shop, blah, 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 Les Paul, and then they want a $800, my budget for the amp is $800 or whatever. People are strange. I say that as a people. I'm strange too. For that, all the flaws of that casino, I still love playing it because I've always dug the aesthetic. And once I know that it's a piece of wood, and all the electronics which are still off, I will be changing out, and it's going to give the sound I want. And I've already made all the other changes, all the criticism I had. Notice the pots and switch and jack and bridge that I didn't like are sitting here, no longer in the guitar. But then again, I'm in a unique position where I can just do that. And cards on the table, I didn't pay $700 for that. I got that at cost, basically. There are benefits to being where I'm at. But I would not accept a cost price on an amplifier and then review it as if it were not an in-kind thing. But I think when I do the review on the Epiphone, I'm gonna have a lot of negative things to say about it, and kind of end with the premise that if you want a better guitar, buy the Yamaha. It's infinitely better guitar for the same price. But people are strange, including myself, and the aesthetics of this thing are just chef's kiss. So people are strange, so we got to be stranger. Brendan Gauntner, I would not look for a single-ended normal channel Vox as a practice amp, because it's not going to be a lower wattage, lower volume version of what you love. Just use your AC15C1X with the master low. You're going to turn that master down to noon, and you're going to be at the same output pretty much as you get from a 5-watt single-ended amp, but you're not going to have all the downsides of it, and then you don't have to buy a second amp because you already have it. Hey, Broken Home, look at all my Fender videos where I add almost every vintage Fender that comes in, I'm changing out the 2-prong to a 3-prong, or an incorrectly installed 3-prong to the correct 3-prong. And I show how I do that. And I don't use the on-off reverse. I would not use the on-off reverse switch. I would either wire it just on-off and in one unused position, or I would replace it with a 2-pole double throw. Or 2-pole single throw if you want to wire it like a Fender, but there's no advantage to reversing the polarity at all. But if you want to see how I do it, including in your Supro, look at my vintage Fender playlist, because it's there again and again and again. Hey, Enrique, I don't have any thoughts on a Tone King Royalist. I don't have any experience with them, but I hope they're great. Yeah, the TAD stuff that Tube Depot has is fantastic, because Tube Depot has really, really good tube testing. My buddy Rob, who used to work there, set up their tube testing regimen, and they do a good job of using all the stuff that he put in place. And they're really nice people, and I like them very much. Hey, Michelle, if you see this, but the TAD, not everything TAD makes is in stock or available at all times. So we're still not fully recovered from the shortage of 3 years ago, but we're in a much better place than we used to be. Hey, Martin, if you're not playing all the time, I would say you want to run your amps at least several hours a month. I would, we wouldn't do any harm for you to walk into your music room and turn every amp on for 20, 30 minutes once a week, just to keep the filter caps charged. Just power them on and let them run for 15, 20 minutes. And repeat that once a week, and the amp will last much longer. You just don't want the caps to dry out. Hey, Bojan, how and why do capacitors of the same value but different construction, e.g. tantalum, silver mica, mylar, influence the AC signal that passes through them, and how do they each sound in audio circuits? Well, they don't all influence the AC signal passing through them, and they don't all have different sounds. Tantalum has a different sound. Tantalum is a polarized form of electrolytic. It's tantalum versus aluminum. And I would not use them in the signal path for various reasons. I would not use them at all in an amplifier because they go boom. But let's look at silver mica versus mylar versus ceramic. People won't want to believe this. I have found that there are differences in the sound. It is more apparent, in my experience, with the smaller value capacitors, that you're more likely to notice a difference in, say, 500 picofarad bright caps than you are in 100 nanofarad output coupling caps. There's voltage, there's material. There are a couple different factors. Sometimes in certain environments, a outer foil end being to the point of lowest impedance can be of benefit as far as noise. But way too much is made of all that. I would rather give John Suhr a pile of Zycon half-watt metal film resistors and a pile of Panasonic ECQ film cap 600 volts and say, go build an amp. And those are ubiquitous, cheap, mass-produced, available everywhere components, nothing snobby about them, but they're really good quality and they're known. Then give the average hobbyist, here are all the Sozos and Synergies and Jupiters and Reikonome and Allen and Bradley, or Esoteric, this Vishay 3-watt metal film. Because the person who's chasing his tail, like, oh, I don't want to use an orange drop for that. I found that I want the 150M there, but in this other spot, I want an orange drop, but it can't be a 716p. It has to be a 715p. They're going to be chasing their tail and all that other stuff. Meanwhile, John will have built a really great sounding amp that's predictable. That said, once you get to the level, say of John or Dave Friedman, or I like to think myself, there are times when you say, yeah, I like the sound of a ceramic for this. I like the sound of a silver mica for this. But it's a nuanced thing. It's not like, hey, I changed that one capacitor and the amp sounds totally different. You have to say that in conjunction with this other thing are going to give a different character to second order distortion, whatever. It's a lot of little changes which make a cumulative change, but no one of them by themselves is that audible. I wouldn't worry about that so much at this point if you're just getting into this. Find something that will give you good results and then learn how the circuit works, because changes to the circuit can do more than changes in material. That's why I had John Suhr starting with generic half-watt metal films and some Panasonic ECQs. He can build an amp that sounds great with that, and none of the other, there's no mojo. It's just the science. I cannot comment on the aluminum versus steel chassis debate because I don't keep up with such debates because I have a life. I don't think it's against modern safety codes to use aluminum these days. People do use aluminum chassis. There might be some codes in some places, but in general, steel is a stronger material, can better support the weight of the heavy transformers that they use in tube amps. But I've had the occasional modern production amp which had aluminum, even milled aluminum chassis, and they're beautiful things. They're just not as strong as steel. Thanks, Brendan Gauntner. Very much appreciated. I know people talk about noise fields and tone being affected by steel versus aluminum, and I've shut up and play your guitar. All right. George Fellows has got a Gibson Firebird 2020 model. Pickups read 22 and 24 ohms. Is that weird? Are you measuring that in circuit, or are you measuring it, with the pickups disconnected? Are you sure you mean 22 and 24 ohms versus 22K and 24K? I'll wait for your follow-up before I speculate, but 22 and 24 ohms seems wrong, regardless of in circuit or out. Pacific Nature TV, I get asked this an awful lot, and my answer is almost always go to valvewizard.co.uk, read all that stuff, buy his books, memorize as much as possible, then build a bunch of pedals, get good at building those pedals, then look at, take your knowledge from the books and look at the pedals stuff and get books on pedal stuff. See what you change about the pedals that you wanted to, as far as design goes. Like, hey, I'm gonna start with a tube screamer and I want a tube screamer without a mid-range hump. Okay, do it. I want a rat that has a two-band EQ. Okay, do it. I would, both for repair and design concepts, work on pedals first, because you're not going to be damaging something as expensive and you're not going to get electrocuted. But once you get into amplifiers with 350 to 700 volts DC present everywhere, there are no takebacks. There's no second player. And if you do mess up something like that, if you short something there, you can have a fire and actual things get burned and things cost a lot of money versus, well, I need another 9-volt battery. That was stupid. Bob Olson, you can use the external speaker at the same time as the internal speaker on the Princeton Reverb. I don't know why you think you can't. That's why it has an auxiliary jack. You can use both. The issue is you just have to watch your total impedance load. Let's see. Hey, Otto, would I ever make a video of my desk and the tools and stuff you use? Thanks. Here's my desk. You see me use the tools in the videos as I use them. It's a small but efficient setup. It's not as neat right now as it has been. I need to put stuff up like the long Phillips screwdriver, the medium length flat blade, my main Phillips screwdriver. Let's see, this one. Oops, resting on place. This one goes here. This one goes over there somewhere. This tucks in here. Is it exciting enough for everyone yet? Here's my bench video. I don't think anyone really cares about the stuff like that. I think they care about the stuff that goes on the bench that the stuff like that is used on. And the beautiful dancing scope behind us, which will appear in certain videos from time to time, but most of the time it's not going to add anything of value to one of the videos that I release. So it's used on almost every amp that comes in at some point. But I appreciate your interest. And also, I should say, in the description of all my videos for the past 6 months plus, there's been a long list of the number one stuff I use. I don't list like Stanley screwdrivers, but you see me pick up a yellow handled screwdriver, it's either Stanley or DeWalt, and there you go. Now, if Stanley or DeWalt or someone wants to sponsor me, I'll be glad to talk about them. Hey, buddy with an H. Let's see faster. Nylock versus Kep's nuts. Lock washer versus split. I prefer split to lock washers in general because I don't use it straight against the chassis. I use it against a steel washer because then I know I'm going to have a lot of compression, and it's the compression force rather than the friction force of the tooth grabbing into a chassis. I like that because that is a known force. It's not going to slip. Once it's compressed, it's tight. Nylock versus Keps. If it's something where I'm going to know that in the course of if its use, it's going to be removed then put back, then removed then put back, I'll use a Keps because Nylock, use it once or twice. After that, that nylon part loses its grip. So it's a set, and really it's a set and leave alone kind of thing. And certain, I've learned this the hard way, like on a power transformer, typically I won't use nylocks because the screws are of fairly soft metal, and by the time you get them torqued against the chassis, the screw will shear off with a nylock versus a Keps nut where the teeth grab the chassis first. So it takes. By the time that gets tight, you're not gonna shear off that screw. That's when you have a screw built into a transformer like a power transformer. For a vertical output transformer where I supply the mounting hardware, I'll use a stainless screw that I have yet to be able to shear myself, and I'll use a nylock there. Other things, but like I said, if I'm going to put in something where I expect, hey, down the road to remove this board, these four nuts need to come off so the board comes off, I'm going to use a Keps nut for that. I'm not going to use either going to use a Keps nut, or rarely I'll use a regular nut with a compression spring washer beneath it because I don't want it to wear out. If I use a nylock, you put it on and off twice, it's lost its hold, and that's probably as much as we need to do right now. But you also want one other consideration with like standoffs on the chassis. You make sure the standoff is flush and perpendicular to the chassis. You don't want any chance of it being at an angle. So that's another reason that sometimes you choose one washer or another, like an external tooth versus an internal tooth. So you have it flush. Like if you're using a steel compression ring washer, but you have an aluminum standoff, that standoff is not really going to be able to push that compression washer all the way down, and you end up with it never getting tight. There are a lot of little things like that. If you start doing this, you'll figure out all the pitfalls, like, oh, that didn't work at all like I expected. Let me try this other thing. And you'll just kind of a checklist in your head. Oxidation is always a concern, but oxidization is a concern anytime dissimilar metals contact. Let's see. JDS, most good meters can measure capacitance, though the capacitor 9 times out of 10 should be out of circuit to give you a useful measurement. But yeah, I can measure a cap and say, yep, that's within tolerance, or whoa, that 220 picofarad cap only measures 80 picofarad. That one's bad, et cetera, et cetera. But not all meters do it. Most do, and not all people who own meters know all the things that their meter can measure. So when in doubt, read the manual. Let's see here. Thanks, Fender Ludwig. That means a lot to me. I am not aware of Ron Jinks, Richard Clark. I hope he does great work. Let's see. Jesse Harmon got a 68 Bandmaster for $900 last year. There you go, man. You get that $900. Even if you have to put $400 or $500 into getting it restored, which would be on the very high end of that would include tubes typically. That's just a great amp, and to build one like it would cost $3,000. Hey, Telly, thank you very much. I'm a Princeton fan as well. Princetons are a beautiful thing. Is there any advantage to having a treble bleed on a guitar versus a pedal with a buffer, which is always on to keep the Hyman rolling down the guitar volume? Well, those are two separate concepts. I don't like treble bleeds in guitars because they're rarely executed correctly. The exception I would give is if someone's a jazz player and they're playing and they never are rolling down to clean up the amp or anything. They're just going within a very nuanced set of volume fluctuations with a fairly narrow dynamic range, and the amp sound is not expected to change. At that case, a treble bleed, a very mild treble bleed circuit could be nice, just so as you turn down, you're not getting any real variation. That said, I still prefer what's called 50s wiring, which is just connecting the tone circuit to the wiper, so that as you turn the volume down, there's series resistance between the pickup and the capacitor in the tone circuit. So it's like as you roll your volume down, it automatically rolls up the tone pot. So you got a 250K tone pot, and you turn your volume down halfway, then you got a 500K tone pot. So it gets brighter as you turn down the volume. That's totally separate from a buffer. A buffer is a great way of preserving. Say that I like the sound of my guitar plugged into that amp with a 20-foot cable, but because of the stage I'm using and the pedals I'm using, I actually end up having 60 feet of cable. Well, if I run a 20-foot cable to a buffer, and it's the right buffer, it's a good buffer, then at that point, that's where that signal is as far as the guitar pickup interaction is. And so from any point after that buffer, it's transparent to the guitar. The pickups aren't affected by anything after that buffer. So I can have the 60 feet of cable, and it still sounds like the 20 feet without all the other stuff. And I'm not going to go too far down this, but there are things called resonant peaks with pickups, which is why this... Hear how that's got a little wah, wah, wah? I'll roll down the volume. I'll roll down the tone, rather. I'll roll down the volume. You can't hear it on the video probably, but here in the room I can hear that that's a little bit darker. Turn down the volume just a little bit. The high-end response came back, even though the tone control is turned down because that series resistance. It's all these things interacting as far as the guitar goes. And that a resonant peak is caused by the interaction of this guitar and the impedance of that amplifier. And so the other benefit of the buffer besides having a 20-foot cable, in theory, is that the input of a buffer behaves like the input of an amplifier rather than the input of a pedal. So I always have that resonant peak right there going to the buffer, no matter what pedal I have on or how far the distance to the amp is, because that can really change the capacitance and the reaction, and that moves your resonant peak around. But it'd be so much easier to show you in person. At some point, I'll do a video on this and get it really recorded right, because you could hear all this on a recording much more than you can with a 57, 12 feet away from an off-axis bandmaster. But it's always fun to try to do these things. I have heard about the new Vox handwards. Every 10 to 15 years, Vox comes up with a new version of a hand-wired something or other, and this time they mean it. And this time they've figured out the long-lost secret that the rest of us have known for the past 60-plus years. I'll see how they deliver. Until then, I'm going to expect it to be marketing. Let's see, people arguing with me about AC4C1s. I've heard that Headstrongs are great. I've not been inside one. I have no thoughts on a third power woolly coat. I'm not familiar with that amp. I've been in one third power, and there may be a video on that at some point. And overall, I was very impressed with the build quality, and the people at Third Power very much care about what they do. But the example that I had an issue which Third Power resolved rather than me having to make a change. So I didn't think it was fair to do a video on an amp which had an issue that Third Power took care of. But I've not gotten the final result from them or the owner. I can't say, hey, and here's the final thing, and they fixed this, and therefore this is great. All I could show you would be the problem I documented that they really took care of. And I'll be glad to tell everyone here that, but it wasn't enough to do a video about. It wasn't fair to put in a video form. Hey, this amp has a problem. The company says they're going to fix it. Will they really? No, I'm not 60 Minutes, though I am turning into Andy Rooney, which is depressing. So I hope that the Woolly Coats is fantastic. Yeah, there's the valvewizard.co.uk. Matt Fields put up the link. Thank you very much. I have not heard of a Sano amp, Mr. Victor B., but aloha to you and mahalo for joining us. I hope that was correct usage of mahalo. Most of my Hawaiian I got from Lilo and Stitch, and some of what Stitch said I think might have been rude. And when my son was 4, my world was Lilo and Stitch. Constantly. Oh, my God. I think we're now to where I was. I think we're at where I was when I took a break almost. Let's see. The 5E3 video is going to be coming pretty soon, Bamboo. Thank you. Or let's see. Let's see. Jeff in West Kentucky. Hey, Jeff. Are there any other things beyond filter and bias caps I should be looking to have done to a 72 Bassman 10? I want full F&T. He went full F&T on the caps. Well, all the electrolytic caps need to be changed. Sometimes, probably not in 72, but I've noticed a lot of the diodes used in Fenders from the 60s have begun to fail where they never used to before, but enough time has passed. Keep an eye on the diodes and the rectifications or bias. I'm not sure about, I don't remember the Bassman 10. I think that's solid state rectification. 72 is the last year before they started waxing the hell out of the boards, but there might be a light wax on your board, in which case check for DC here and there. With any Fender from the 60s and 70s, watch the board for warpage. If the board is warped, any resistor which is mounted horizontally, make sure it's not broken or come loose at either end, which is very common on those. Make sure all the pots and jacks and other hardware is tight. And in 72, that's the year they switched from screwed-in baffles to dadoed, glued-in baffles. So just periodically keep an eye on your chipboard baffle. Make sure all your speaker hardware is tight, that you don't have any water damage or moisture damage. Beyond that, the only other thing you can do on a 72 is maybe spend a weekend or one night trying to eliminate all the spaghetti from your amp. Just say, hey, yeah, I can remove an extra 3/4 of an inch from this wire and a 1/2 inch from this wire, because all that white wire in there, they just use excessive lengths of it. By the time you're done, you've got 4 feet of excess wire out of that. The whole thing's much neater. The lead dress is very neat, at which point you can usually ditch the 2 nanofarad caps from the grids to the ground on the output jacks, because they're just there to keep the thing from oscillating, because it oscillated because it had so much excess wire. You remove the excess wire, the whole thing can just have a little more pleasing, transparent high end. Ouch on the old Rev Stars in 2019. The bridge on the one I had and the ones I've played, Brad, they have fixed that. But damn, that's a big mistake. Though, in honesty, I've seen a lot of the Gibson USA stuff where the bridge is within a generous 1/8 inch margin of its ideal placement. You can just move the saddles to compensate. But you'd think with CNC and fucking science, they'd have an optimal placement of that. Brendan Gontner, I cannot make an AC4 C1 be to the AC15 C1 standards because from the ground up. The AC4 and the AC10 are built to be cheap, 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 cheap. Different kind of board, different kind of layout, different kind of construction overall. It's just not at all like the 15 or the 30. It's almost like they're different companies. Hey, C128D. Yeah, I think the Katana is better than the Catalyst in a lot of ways, but some guns out there are going to love the Catalyst, and you're not wrong. But yeah, the 50-watt Mark II Katana is absolutely one of the ones I meant. All right, so now we're at the last coffee break. We're almost to the next one, but it's about 8 minutes away. So, yeah, I mean, they're cathode biased ultralinear hi-fi amps, but they were designed to be really mega clean and 10 watts or whatever. I don't think it makes any sense for an instrument amplifier. Let's see. Because I'm to the last break, there's a break in the questions. Hey, Josh Roberts. And wait for the next question. And a result, a reminder to everyone or people who just got here, please put a question mark and a space before any question you have for me. It helps me see the actual questions. Hey, Rob French, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. Yeah, the Tone King, Sky King, both Bartell and the new one, has ultralinear mode. I didn't care for it, and it hummed. Yeah, but you're right. It is cathode biased, and it's ultralinear, but I didn't hear any benefit to it. It was like, oh, okay. So now it has a hum where it didn't have it before. So I don't know if the Bartells hummed, but the new ones do, and it seems a pointless change. Aside from that, and the catching on fire thing, that whole catching on fire thing, I thought the Sky King was pretty cool. It's a 583 Deluxe with additional gain stage and a neat little trick they do, which I don't need to share with everyone. But yeah, it's interesting little circuit. Trainer YGL3. I don't recall which one the YGL3 is or what all the marks are, Adrian. I'm sorry. The trouble with Trainer is that we kind of only get the greatest hits down here in Memphis. So Bassmasters, we get Bassmasters, and we get some of the cheapest stuff. But most of Trainer's market is Canada, and we just don't have a lot of Trainers here. So I don't know nearly as much about Trainer as I do about the more prominent companies in the United States. So again, I'd send people to people like Chris Church up in outside of Toronto. He's in Hamilton, Church Audio. But there are Canadian techs who've been dealing with Trainer for 30 years. I get maybe 3 or 4 a year, and then certain models again and again. Hey, Paul Crane. I'm glad you made it here. Let's see. Yomar asks, is there any benefit to higher end resistors and caps in a guitar amp circuit? Depends on what you mean by higher end. I wouldn't. The only places where you can really spend money and have it be a real logical thing, I mean serious money, is large value film caps for your filter caps, like you can find in some cars, where there'd be a whole bunch of 10 and 20 microfarad caps, and in any other amp would be electrolytics, so relatively small, about $3 to $5 each. Car will use the big Solon film caps, which are gargantuan in size and $10 to $30 each. But the advantage is that they're not going to fail, or they're going to outlive, certainly, the typical electrolytic aluminum electrolytic cap. So there are places where you can spend your money and get longevity. They're like that. There are places where you may spend some money on a 2-watt sealed military spec PEC pot, but it has a physical resistance you don't like. The taper's not quite as nice as CTS, and I gotta say that some of those $15 to $30 PEC pots, they do develop noise. You have to open them up to clean them, and it's a pain in the butt to do that. Whereas with the CTS for Alpha for $2 to $5, it's got a little opening. You just spray in your contact cleaner, and there you go. As far as resistors, unless you're talking about, hey, I need to get a 30-watt power resistor, and it needs to be chassis mount, there's no need to spend money for like you don't pay more than a couple bucks for a resistor in general. There are some places where there's some Vichy metal films 2 and 3 watts that I really like the sound and behavior of in certain parts of a circuit, and they're like $2 to $3 each versus 34 cents. Really 5 to 30 cents for the average resistor used. But I wouldn't build an entire amp out of those $3 resistors. That'd be pointless. It's only in the places where I can hear a difference. Hey, Hal, we talked about your Telly a little bit, but since you're here, we're not going to talk about your Telly anymore. Hey, Alain. Bonjour. Mesa tubes, amp alternator, Mesa tubes are just Sovtex. Sorry. Rob Hunter, I don't know why Canadian versions of JCM800s didn't include a 16-ohm impedance selection. Canada has some strange requirements for Marshall back in the day with all these additional fuses, including just long strands of wire that served as fuses. But again, you have to ask a Canadian tech who's been doing this for 30, 40 years. A lot of it I've just heard about, and I'm like, ooh, yeah, Canada's weird. I love Canada. In theory, it gets too cold for me. But other than that, they seem like really nice people, and I like a lot of the music. Best cap per vintage, Princeton. Hayseed, I've had some really bad luck with some hayseeds. I tried them for a long while. CE, it's kind of a flip of the coin as to whether you're getting one that lasts or one that doesn't. But it is the best way to do it like Leo did without any changes. I'm probably going to bite the bullet and design a little PCB that I can have printed up that'll fit in there, and I can put a little plug over the existing hole and allow me to mount some stuff without drilling too much. In the past, I have drilled 2 holes in the chassis and put in 2 terminal strips and gone to axials or radials. And I think it might be better, rather than doing terminal strips, to do a little PCB that takes some real high quality 12,000 hour, 105 degree rated radials. But there's the vintage people and their inherent love of PCBs that I've got to bear in mind. But So in the past couple of Princetons, I have explained the situation to the owner, and the owner decided to try the CE caps, knowing that if after 6 months or after a year, if that cap died, it was not my fault. I did not sell them a bad thing. I said, this is the least intrusive, most period correct option, but it may have this problem. And those past several amps I've done that have not had the problem, but 5 years ago I had like 2 or 3 in a row, so maybe it was a bad run. Hey, Oswego. Yeah, sometimes you'll hear microphonics if you're tapping on a film cap, but you have to remember, in operation, no one's tapping on that cap. That is an exaggerated condition. Hey, Dominic. My name is Kyle, but I'll forgive you. My name is not Kyle. Sorry, you threw me off. My name is Lyle. It's been that kind of week, folks. Inexperience with the old Lab series amps from New Orleans. They're really well built for a 70 solid state. Thank you for remembering my name, next one down. And they sound really great, but they were built with things which have not been available in 30, 40 years. So when they need service, sometimes it gets tray shared to seek out certain things like the compressor chip in a lab and the inductors. If those go south, man, you're going to be hurting if they can be found at all. But they can sound fantastic. And but even Ty Tabor switched over to, sadly, to Mesas, but I think he sounded better with the labs, but I think he was just having too many problems on the road, and that was 20 years ago. This bandmaster has started having a low frequency thing way in the background. I have to check the tubes on that. That's got all the original tubes in it, though, so not on me. Is the Classic 50, Brendan asked, the PV Classic 50 was released in the same line as the Deuce and the Mace. Is the Classic 50 a lower wattage Mace or Deuce? Thanks. There are two PVs that are called the Classic 50. There's the older one from the 70s, 80s, that was part of the same series as the Mace and the Deuce, and there's the later one from the late 80s, early 90s, which is a totally different amp, but also called the PV Classic 50. And I'm not sure about the earlier version, which was in the same line as the Mace or Deuce, but it's been so long since I had one that I honestly don't remember, and I'm sorry. But I didn't want anyone to think that the more the more famous later version, which lasted for 30, 40 years of Classic 50, was the same as a Mace or Deuce, because the Mace and Deuce are kind of associated with Skinnerd and Molly Hatchet and that kind of era, and I didn't want people to think they could get a Classic 50 and be imbibing of that recipe. Rob Hunter, I would find a vendor that I like and trust, which would be typically Tube Depot and the Tube Store, and I'd see what they had in stock. And I'd also want to know which amp. Like an 800, the power tubes aren't doing all that much, so I might look at a JJEL34L for some, for just for reliability. A 1959 Super Lead output tubes are really contributing to the sound. I might go with something a little more character than the EL34L. When it comes to tubes today, the vendor matters more than the brand. And you can call them and say, hey, what do you got right now that's really good or people have had the fewest problems with? Hey, Jules, I don't keep up with all the commercial voltage regulators. I don't know anything about the Amp Maniac. I've got a seriously old school, like right off of Captain Nemo's submarine, Variac, and I use that, but I'm not gigging with it. So I know the brown box is good, does what it says, but it's expensive. I'm unfamiliar with the Amp Maniac. JC Rocket, yeah, any attenuator can damage your power tubes. There are two things that can happen. A poorly designed attenuator can actually actively damage the output of your amp. But sometimes even a perfectly working attenuator can cause you to damage your amp because you're going to be running the amp much hotter than you otherwise would. And it's working harder. Something was already going wrong or a tube was already failing. And so you've hastened what was already happening just by running it much harder than you would have otherwise. Curtis Everett, you and I need to talk about watches at some point. Oh, the C10NS is a different cone than the standard N. I don't know the C10NS here. Sorry, I thought he had a typo, and he meant to spell C10Ns, as in more than one C12N. But if it's a different cone, I'm unfamiliar with that. Cinnamon and sugary and softly colored lies, Richard Clark. Well, you should, Brad. It's a really nice watch. Is there any motivation for amp companies to make replacement boards available for these ones that burn up, et cetera? Would right to repair laws cover stuff like that? Well, Marshall should have had their asses sued off for the whole TSL, DSL, JCM 2000 issues. Any other company would have gone under from that, but Marshall just like, hey man, we don't know anything about that, and they got away with it. I don't understand it. Right to repair laws, that's kind of depend on the country. Hopefully, the EU's regulations might force the market as a whole to follow suit on things like that. But I doubt it will be to the level it really helps. It's not even always to the level of a JCM 2000 that catches on fire, where the Marshall totally screws up over the owner. It can just be a little Fender XD Champ or whatever with the little digital reverb card or whatever, and that card dies, and then they don't have any in stock because they moved on to the next model, and that just screws over all these people who spent $300-400 on this thing. Just send the kid the new board. If you're building something that cheap to build to begin with, keep an extra $5,000 of the thing that's most likely to fail, so your customer doesn't get screwed. That's where I'd like to see some regulation. At least for a time window, because a lot of those Fender XDs where the board was no longer made had only been out of production like 2 or 3 years. I think it was just insulting. But I am not an attorney, so I should stop right there. Just 1 second. I want to see if wiggling one of these tubes makes that little staticky background sound go away in that bandmaster, which has been completely beautifully healthy until this moment. It's a repeating kind of thing, like but it's not. Doesn't have the same duration each time. It's not rhythmic, so it's not a cap. I suspect it's an output tube. I will find out more after the stream. Let's see. A 5-watt Bisonic watch collab channel. I think Keith needs to get some more watches first. All right, we're going to take another 7-minute break. We're a little bit 11 or 12 minutes over that, and then we'll come back and do some more fun amp talk kind of stuff. So I'll see you all in a little bit. Alrighty, back. And I just realized I spilled my coffee as I walked out of here before, so I got some cleaning up to do after this, but it'll be okay. Until then, it's just seasoning the floor. Filthy tone, that's tricky. I can get a 5B3 dead silent as far as hum, but it's tricky. When I do the 5B3 build, you can follow along that series of videos, and you will then see all my tricks such as they are. In the meantime, I would point out that any cathode bias amp, like a 5E3, you really need well-matched output tubes to get the maximum amount of hum rejection. If there's a slight imbalance, it can perform fine as far as amplifying your guitar, but you're going to have that hum because it's not going to be rejecting the ripple that the two sides have in common. So never be afraid to try better matched tubes. Let's see. Clem Fandango just got a Friedman Pink Taco. Never had a head without a standby before. What's the best way to unplug and replug if switching guitars? Let me show you. First of all, you don't need a standby switch in that amp. A lot of amps don't need standby. So here, pretty loud, maybe too loud for the mic here. Dead silent. Here's your free plug for you, Neutrik, pun intended. Neutrik silent switching plugs. Switchcraft makes a version of this too, though I think they're a little less elegant. I love these things. I use them all the time because I'm constantly unplugging and replugging in things and unplugging guitars, and I don't like doing that pop. I can make it happen there if I defeat the silent switch ring. So there's your answer. Get those. You can either buy the cable that already has it for like $50-$60, or you can make your own for like $30. I use Mogami W2924 cable and silent plugs from Neutrik, at least at one end, and I'll use a Neutrik Switchcraft or Amphenol plug at the other end. I usually do two Neutriks because I'm anal that way. And then I wash my hands 12 times and turn the light switch on and off 12 times precisely. But, there's your answer. Much better than making a change to your amp. It seems there are an inordinate number of players and collectors who also dabble in watches. I think it's something about guitars and tubes and watches. It's a kind of a purposeful semi-anachronism and a loving of old tech. I mean, my phone is phenomenal. It does all these things. And I could have an Apple Watch, which is really just more of a wrist computer. And it could also tell me what time it is, but it's not the same thing as something with gears and wheels and balances. And I like the mechanical beauty of all that. I also like the quartz ones that I have and the digital ones that I have, I almost wore my calculator watch today because I thought it'd be kind of fun. But I like the it's like the video I did a couple weeks ago with the Moog, where I was like, yeah, I could do all this on my computer with SoftSense now, but something nice about just turning the knob and having it react to me in real time. Hey, Eric. He's got a PV Valve King with a quad of 6L6. Pardon me, 6L6s. DC heaters in series, yeah. It's 40 volts DC. Let's see. Shouldn't be 40 volts. It should be 12 volts. And I'm not sure what you mean it binds in a 12X7. One tube glows like hell. If one tube glows like hell, try a different tube there, but a series heater resistance like that, set up like that in a PV, the only problem with that is if one tube goes out, they all, the entire signal goes out. But I wouldn't convert it to parallel 6.3 volts. Just keep it in series. But if one of those tubes is glowing, if it's, it may just be a cosmetic thing where you just actually see it a lot more than you normally would. If it has a problem, it'd be the tube. But it's just not going to go more than 12 volts. I can't imagine that it would be a real problem, just maybe a visual oddity. Let's see. Hey, Mark Vanderleen, that's not a good comment to make here about slave bracelets. Okay, let's keep that kind of talk off here. I'm not going to, my only options here are to remove, I don't have the option to delete your post, and I'm not going to ban you over that, but let's not get into stuff like that, okay? I use boutique caps for the looks and the form factor, Matt says. Yeah, I love the 1813 series Vichy, and I'll use other things. Or if someone wants them to be yellow, and they're happy to pay $7 to $15 a cap, I'll gladly use a Jupiter or whatever. If it's just cosmetics, I think the 1813 is probably my ideal axial film cap for a number of reasons. I love the rigidity of the lead. I love how low mass to the body is, and how good they sound. But if someone really wants orange drops, especially in a radial form factor, I'll use a radial orange drop happily if everything fits, and it's not squeezing a 0.8 millimeter lead through a 0.08 millimeter lead through a 0.06 millimeter hole in a PCB. How do you make a 64 hand-wired deluxe reverb reissue sound better? Turn it off! Shh. I showed that in a video about 2 weeks ago. You either have to give up on one channel or make some other changes to get rid of the noisy way they put reverb and trim on both channels. Wristwatch and shoes often means that the willowy, model-looking girls will speak to you at the BS corporate event. No, my model-looking wife will talk to me in the kitchen or the hallway or the living room, but she especially likes it when I'm doing yard work or the dishes. But she'll talk to me even if I'm not wearing a watch. I'm not a fan of the Heritage Series AC30 and AC15s. Yeah, they have the EF86 channel, which is nice, but the construction is not very good. They're very flimsy construction, and critically, they're fake turret boards, where the turrets are actually soldered to pads on a PCB with no actual mechanical connection to the board beyond that solder, and it breaks. It does exactly what anyone looking at it would say. They say, "Oh, you could build it that way, but what about this, this, this?" They just went ahead, and they're flimsy and they break, and they're a pain in the butt. And the lead-free solder is particularly bad for that style of construction. I think the current AC15 and 30, both the custom and the current hand-wired series, are infinitely better than the Heritage series. Get one of the current ones and then use a suitable overdrive pedal to goose it for a little different harmonic response if you want the EF86 thing. Hey, hi-fi. I love old high-wide amps. I'm not sure if I'd ever have a place to play them. They're so loud and so nice, and I love them. But you do have to blend the brilliant and normal channels, because the normal is too dark and the brilliant doesn't have any low end. But I'm a huge Gilmore fan, and that's a great sound. But at the end of the day, I could have the exact dialed-in DR103 versus a twin reverb, and no one in the audience would hear a difference, other than they wouldn't have their ears ring quite as much from the twin. And Gilmore used twins as well. You can see him in various videos doing that. But I do love old hi-wats, and I love the Live at Leeds thing, though. There's a reason Townsend is deaf. Hey, Jorge. Sorry, I can't talk today, Jorge. Thank you, Jorge. What tone upgrades recommended for twin reverb reissues, cathode caps, tone stack pots? None of that. And nothing even as crazy as was things I'd like to do would be changing making it more. Let's see how far to go into this. No, I'm just scratch all that. Reliability mods, the same ones I've shown for the other deluxe reverb and super reverb reissues. And move the heater connections from the board to the octal sockets. Move the screen grid resistors from the PCB to the tube sockets. That's really about it. Make sure that the reverb driver socket is wired correctly, and I've shown that in those videos. The twin reverb reissue is good. It's not the exact circuit. It's the other Fender reissue series are much more the circuit they originally did. The twin reissue does some different things with the rectification, which means that the secondary winding on the power transformer is different. But it's a really good amp. Do those reliability mods I talked about. Make sure all the hardware is tight. Make sure all the connections are clean and solid. And then ditch the C12Ks and get some G12Cs and be happy. I don't know any companies that would make a custom head shell. Sorry, there are a lot of companies that will, but I'm not sure what your budget is. You could contact Mojotone. They've got a really good cabinet shop, and if you have the dimensions, they'll be glad to make you one. It just you pay a lot for a one-off. Some of the companies I used to use were bought out by other companies, so I can't send you the Lipo line anymore, etc. Let's see. Okay, circle 3 cases. Chris at circle 3 cases, Dustin says. Well, then, to follow Dustin's advice, Dustin's good. Dustin knows these things. Poppy Seeds, do I recommend buying an old late 70s Music Man amp? And are they difficult, costly to repair? No, they're okay. The main problem they have, besides electrolytics wearing out, is the same thing all the things Leo touched have. Their bias board, which has some of the low voltage stuff, is a fiber board just like from an old 60s or 70s Fender. And it again warps, as they do. And a lot of those component leads pull out of the solder joints. So whenever I get an old Music Man in, I recap it. I reflow everything on that fiber board, and I'm usually prepared to replace at least all the transistors, including any power transistors in there. And they can be a little bit weird to bias, and they run really high voltage, and they are loud and clean as hell, and not everyone's going to like the sound of it. But if you do like the sound of it, there's nothing in it that's really made of unobtainium these days. But it can be, I don't think it has a lot of intrinsic market value, even though it may have value to individuals. And so you're putting potentially $600 into an amp that's worth $400 to a lot of people. It's out of favor, but I do kind of like them for certain things. I've not tried a Gen 2 Night Train combo. I've only had the heads, but I imagine that apple didn't fall far from the Night Train tree. I'm not a big fan of the Night Trains. They have some painful decisions. Not talking about stupid, but in terms of physically painful to listen to, really bright stuff. Hey, Kevin Oldman. Yeah, I remember you asked a question last time about the backwards tone stacks in the AC30s. They wired the treble in the old ones in such a way. It's really weird to describe. I wish I had images to show you right now or a diagram. But they wired the bass pot kind of in a standard configuration in the treble pot backwards. And the net result of all that is that clockwise gave you less treble, clockwise gave you less bass. And so if you just invert it where the ins and outs switch on the treble and bass at the same time, then clockwise is more, bass is more. And I like that not because clockwise more is more intuitive to us, but because they use an audio taper pot. And the way the JMI did it, the majority of the change happened in the narrowest range of the pot, whereas if you change it to clockwise equals more, the majority, you have a lot more subtle control. You don't have like, oh, wow, everything's right there. Everything that you want to control is in a much wider sweep. So I think it's a better version. If it was important to have clockwise equals less, the original JMI performance of that pot, it would have been better for them to use reverse audio 1 meg pots, but they did not. So, JMIs were weird, but wonderful, but you can keep the same greatness with a lot more fine control by changing them to the modern. And both the hand-wired and custom series, they did change the behavior to the modern. And I quite like that. Yeah, I've had experience with, I don't personally have experience with brown boxes. And I had some interactions with a guy who made them. I thought he burned some bridges in some forums I was in by being really obnoxious. But maybe he's learned from that. I'm willing to forgive and forget. He seems to be doing okay with it. Victor, stay tuned on news about my amps. I hope to have some good news in the next couple months. It's been a fun couple of years for such things. Alan likes third power very much. Very good. Fred R., I know a couple of good techs around New England. I don't know where you are in New England. I would first recommend you to my buddy Lane Sparber, who's actually in Queens. But there are an awful lot of good guys. I know Rob DeStefano around the Philly area, and probably some other guys in that region. I'm sure Brad's got the same list that I do, but he has access to it right now. But yeah, there are a lot of good people in New England, and my recommended mods are not anything. There's no mojo to them. It's just like, hey, Fender got this wrong for heat reasons, and it's very easy to undo, and a lot of it be obvious to a lot of techs. But I don't know if you're in Maine, there might be someone better, and maybe Brad could help you. Tell us where in New England you are. New England's pretty broad spectrum. Oh, see, Poppy Seeds, you asked the question twice, and I've told everyone don't ask the question twice. And so the second time you paid me for it, and I already answered it. I already answered it when you asked me for free. Now, I appreciate everyone who does a super chat, but again, or if you're new here, you don't have to do a super chat for me to answer your question. I love the super chats. I appreciate the super chats. If you do ask a super chat, I will be sure to answer your question before the end of the stream. But you don't have to do a super chat. I don't want to bribe people, but please only ask questions once. It's hard for me to keep up with everything else. I don't have any experience with Brunetti amps from Italy. Hey, RJ, how different is a Marshall JTM45 from a super bass in practice? He's got the super bass. Is he missing out? Well, the super bass is a lot louder. It's 100 watts versus about 30 watts. Solid state versus tube, that's going to be a small factor. The super bass is a little bit darker, with more low end and a faster response. The JTM45 is a little bit brighter, not a ton brighter, and it's got a softer response. They sound different as to which you need. Depends on how you're using it. Super bass is going to be louder clean than a JTM45, and might be painful to overdrive versus JTM45. You can stand to be in the room with it. So I don't know what you're using it for. Adam from Tool's got a super bass. That's his main thing. And he's got that thing really loud, but he's also playing freaking Coliseums these days. So They're cosmetically similar amps, and the circuit is not really that dissimilar if you just look at the schematic. About 5 different components throughout the entire audio path. But man, everything that's happening in the power section is completely different. The voltages are completely different. It's like comparing a deluxe reverb to a twin reverb. They're almost the same until you play them. What do I think of a Fender Showman for bass guitar? I think that is the sound that you hear everywhere. That is one of the all-time great bass amps. It was used a ton as a bass amp. It is the sound of that same preamp. That same preamp circuit was used as the Olympic FX1, and the Olympic FX1 was one of the predominant preamps of the 70s and 80s, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with using a Fender Showman for bass. You may not be a huge fan of the speakers that come with that cab, because those speakers kind of date the sound to a certain era, but the amp itself is just a beautiful, clean bass sound. You can also use a twin reverb and get the same thing if you have one. You can also run a DI for your fundamental and just run into a twin reverb with a mic on the speaker to get that little bit of air. Have a beautiful, beautiful sound. So I think highly. And Clem Fandango, I've already answered your question. Remember, guys, if you ask a question and haven't gotten to it yet, if you look at the chat, you'll see where I'm at as far as questions. I try to do them in sequence. So I will get to yours. You don't have to ask it more than once, and I already answered Clem's question. Let's see. Hey, John. He's asked, in a single-ended amp like a Tweed, Champ, or Princeton, is the choice of power tube any more or less critical compared to other types of amp circuits? Well, beyond, 6V6 versus EL84 versus EL34 versus 6L6, yeah, of course, it's very different considerations, all those tubes, but you could go back and forth between if everything is okay as far as current, if you're going back and forth between an EL34 and a 6L6 and a cathode bias amp, especially a single-ended one like a Champ or Princeton, the Tweed Princeton, you may or may not hear a difference between a 6L6 and a 34. You'd hear a huge, or at least a noticeable difference between a 6L6 and a 6V6. I think not in any cathode biased amp, though. There's a range of bias which is safe, which can accommodate more than one tube type, and there's a bias which is optimal, which is only going to be one. And there's going to be an output transformer primary impedance, which is optimal for one tube type, and it'll work with others, but it's only going to be optimal for one. So I'd say you find the single-ended cathode bias amp you like the sound of, that was designed to be optimal with X tube, and that's the tube you should use. I'm not a huge fan of single-ended designs, but they exist, and you just can't expect one little thing to do everything. Find which one does it best. Thank you so much, Tony Leonardi. That's very nice of you. He was gifted a 2-month-old Blues Junior 4. It was stated that it thought its cathode bias. Is it possible? If not, what resistor would I suggest to cool the bias? Well, apparently, I have not had one yet, but apparently Fender released the Blues Junior 4. The Blues Junior 4, as first released, was fixed bias, which runs the tubes way the hell too hot for fixed bias. And then they also introduced, though I have not had because I'm no longer accepting Blues Juniors, a cathode bias version of the same amp, also called the Blues Junior 4, which is terrible. They should call it the 5 or the 4B or something. But it's So it's cathode bias. And as far as I know, it's cathode bias the opposite direction. They have the fixed bias version bias way too hot and the cathode bias a little too cool. But I've not had one in, so I cannot tell you what it should be changed to. But I'd rather have one that runs too cool than one that runs too hot. I am not a fan of the Blues Junior, but if it was gifted to you, that is exactly the right price to pay for. I would play it and enjoy it, and be careful with the fragile input jack, and don't hit the knobs because they'll break. It can sound really good. Don't be afraid to turn the mids down what seems like an awful lot because it's a 25K pot, not a 10K pot. So you can keep it down below 9 o'clock and still be in the range that old vintage Fenders gave you. And it can be a boxy sounding amp otherwise. There's nothing inherently wrong with the Blues Junior aside from it wasn't designed to deal with the heat from the EL84s. It has a plastic input jack that breaks. The filter caps are really cheap and wear out. And in the fixed bias version, they run the output tubes way hot, so the tubes burn up, which hastens the decline of the power tube board. If they have a cathode bias version, which is biased a little too cool, those output tubes are going to last longer. They're not going to run as hot. That'd be the best of all worlds, but you're not going to be the full wattage of the original. But if that works for you, that works for you. I don't hate the Blues Junior. I hate how the shortcuts that Fender did to get it to a price point end up costing the owners a lot of money down the road. To save $100 here, it's going to cost you $400 in time. Ceramic caps can be microphonic, that is true, but it's not as common as people think. Do I have a recommended break-in procedure for new speaker? Yeah, play the damn thing. Play it as much as possible. That's the absolute best way to do it. You're not going to have access to a good variac, and it's not safe for most people to try using a variac to break them in. And you don't need to start manipulating with your hand or anything. You can just play at them all the time, and you could also play some bass to it at a fairly moderate volume if you want to hasten the break-in process. Or, play it face down in a closet with some ventilation and hook an old iPod up to it and play Paul's Boutique for a couple hours while you go for a run. But play it, and that's how it breaks in the best way. Yeah, the early 90s Fender solid-state amps can be pretty good. They have a unique sound. The electrolytics eventually wear out, and you need to make sure all the hardware is tight, including the screws holding the board down. All the jacks are tight and the pots are clean. But yeah, they're really kind of Cro-Magnon level solid state stuff as far as the output transistors, which is good because it means that they can be kept running for a long time fairly cheaply. Eventually you'll want to have a tech take apart the output section, and even if they don't change out the old output resistors, power resistors, wipe away all the old dried out thermal paste and put in some new thermal paste, make everything last and work the way it was designed. But I think they're really nice choices. It's just not something I could have recommended in my apps under $500 video, because it's something I'm going to be talking about in a video on another channel this week. Decisions you have to make. I can't tell whether that deluxe 112 is a good buy for someone or that one is a bad buy for someone, because the reverb listings just show the amp, and you never know if it's, hey, that one's going to be good for another 10 years, or that one's going to be great after it needs $100 worth of work, or if it's going to catch on fire because it never had any work. It just, people got mad at me in those amps under $500 videos because I didn't do PV Bravos and stuff, but I was trying to focus on relatively new construction amps, so people could have a sense of longevity or safety in the purchases. None of the recommendation videos can be 8 hours long and exhaustive. They were exhausting, at least. Let's see. Hey, Alex, rushing water sounds in a DRRI. Long-time listener, first-time caller, what I check. Well, I had rushing water sound in a 72 Deluxe just the other day on a video I put up called Fender Day or Fender Afternoon. And in that one, I had a bad rushing water sound, and it was there even when I pulled the phase inverter tube. And it turned out to be a bad power tube. So if you watch that video, you'll see what I found, but you'll also see, though I edited out some stuff that was repetitive, you'll see what I started with. I'm like, all right, here's the amp. It's got a rushing water sound. I pull V1. Does it still have the sound? I'm going to pull V2. Does it still have the sound? Pull V4. Does it still have the sound? And then I pulled V6, the phase inverter, and this still had the sound. And what I was doing there was saying, all right, if I pull V1, it still has the sound. It's not anything associated with V1. Pull V2, still has the rushing water. It's not anything associated with V2, etc. And then when I pulled the phase inverter, it told me it was nothing involved in the preamp at all. Nothing on that main board was the cause of that rushing water. So then I knew to look at the output tubes. So that's where any of us start. And if you find that it's related to V2 or it's related to V4, then you can say, oh, maybe it's this plate resistor here on V4. It's definitely on V4A, because you can mute the grid of each. There are ways to do it, and I've shown this in a lot of videos. But if it's not one of your preamp tubes, it's not a filter cap, it's not the shielded wire, then it's going to be either a resistor or the output tube. Or you could have my kind of luck, and the tube that you put in to take out one tube and put in a different tube, the second tube is the same problem as the first tube. Rolling tubes sometimes will bite you in the butt. Hi-Fi's got an old Omega Seamaster, very nice. Sean Blythe wants a big answer in a few words. Well, Sean, I answered this question early in the chat, so after this, go back and watch it's in the first 30 minutes, I believe. I'm not trying to be mean to you, but I tried to only answer the one question once per chat, but the answer is there. Yeah, Rumble 25, all the Rumbles are garbage and just abusive of Fender's owners. It makes me mad. Hey, Nick Sarah, he wants to know when input-output jacks need to be grounded to chassis versus isolated. All right, in a traditional Fender amp, you have two low-gain channels, and not an ideal ground path because the preamp from one's here, the preamp from the other's here, and the tubes are actually here. So it's all kind of a compromise as where the grounds are going to go. All right, the switchcraft jacks are great because the ground can be kind of approximate there as long as it's all towards the front of the amp to reject RFI coming in from the outside. So let's just use some switchcraft jacks, and they'll ground right there where they come into the chassis, and they're going to be rock solid. That's going to be great. Move on. All right, now you got, say, a Sur PT100 or some other multi-channel amp where sometimes the signal path is here, sometimes it's way over here, or you have multiple input jacks for everything. You may want to say, well, it's fine for the input jack to be physically here on the chassis, but it cannot go to ground here. It has to go to ground over here, otherwise we're going to have noise. So that's when you want to do something that we call steering the ground, as opposed to just having the ground be wherever it connects, in this case with the switchcraft right there at the chassis. You want to steer that ground. You want the jack physically to be there, but the ground to be over here. So that's when you'd use a steered or wired ground. Use a Cliff or Neutrik or Rion jack there, or Amphenol. So the jack's physically there, but you have a wire going. So it's insulated from the chassis. The wire goes to the ground, the ideal ground point. There are other times when you may want to have a send and return and lift the ground on the return. Well, you could drill out an extra large hole in the chassis to use the switchcraft isolation washers, but once you have the isolation washer on a switchcraft jack, it never really tightens up as well. So I would rather have two Cliff or Amphenol jacks there than two switchcrafts with one of them isolated. So just because you don't want to have a ground loop potential through your effects loop. So that's a place where you'd lift the ground and maybe provide a path to the chassis on the incoming return sleeve through, say, a 10 nanofarad cap in series with a 47 ohm resistor or something. So you have the RFI path to ground, but it's not a full ground. There are a lot of levels to this, as you can tell. So I think that's the answer most guitarists will want to know. If you want to know more, the best way to do it is to study all these amps and look at who did what and why, and say, well, why did they do it that way versus that way? Hey, Max Witten, I will be getting back to the Excaliburs. I've got to find some suppliers for some face plates, and at least to finish up the initial ones, some of which are already built aside from that. And then I'm going to be talking to some guys about making a chassis with the graphics more as a all-in-one package, as opposed to having to get faceplates to put on existing chassis. It'd be great if I had the budget to just say, all right, I'm going to have 500 of these made, and they're going to be purple. And all I've got to do is sign off on them and say, yes, they're great, but now I've got to build them all. But I can probably get somewhere closer to the great level with some combined stuff. It just takes money and time, and I haven't had too many of either lately. I'm having Dustin asking about the coffee break. I am drinking Maxwell House French Roast, dark, made strong with 2 equals and a little bit of half and half because I like it. And I'm 53 years old, and I don't need to be told that it has to be black for me to be a man. I've got the back pains and the child support enough to know that I'm a man. So if I want half and half, I'm going to have half and half. God damn it. Speaking of talking like that, hey, Peter, man, thanks so much. Just get some high-quality H2O. Okay, Travis. Okay. Go enjoy a wine spritzer, Travis. All right, super chat from Jorge. Tech question, why does the plate of the output tubes not have a coupling cap? Haven't seen any on the schematic. Well, that's an interesting situation where the output transformer second primaries are operating on high voltage DC. And so they don't need to be AC coupled to the plates. The transformer itself serves the role of the coupling cap, in that on the plate side, the primary connection to the output tube, that is a high voltage DC, which then goes, is connected to the transformer, and the transformer itself has DC on this side coming in from the output tubes, and AC on this side going out to the speaker jack. And if you look at the symbol for a capacitor, it is 2 lines. So you have the DC here, and DC comes in, and AC goes out. With this transformer, DC is there, AC comes out. So the signal is riding on the DC waveform on each primary here. So you have it going up here, at the same time it's going down here. And then on the AC side, it's combined into 2 AC, AC wires, one which is grounded, which gives us the nice audio waveform here. So the output transformer is the coupling cap for the output tubes, if that makes sense to you. And I look back at these things and I find myself doing stuff like this. It's a very strange life I've found for myself. I don't have any merch yet, hi-fi, but I appreciate that. I'll be getting some. I just got to get some sample T-shirts from some of these companies, make sure that none of them are crappy. I don't want to sell you guys crappy things just to have a logo on them. All right, tech question from Peter. Man, DC on tip of input jack and Fender bass reissue both channels. You want to remove from grid of V1, disappears with standby switch. All right, that's weird. So, even if it's removed from the grid of V1, it's got to be leakage. But that's a reissue. The reissue shouldn't have any leakage. But that's got to be the cause of it. There's got to be DC leaking somewhere. trying to think. It's been a long time since I had one of the baseband reissues. If there's no grid connection present from V1, do you mean that you've pulled V1, or how did you disconnect it from the grid? Because the only way the DC can get on the input jack is either because it's connected to the grid of a tube, which has DC potential there, and then in which case you'd have a faulty grid leak or grid stopper resistor, either the 68Ks or the 1 meg, or if the two 68Ks are mounted on the board opposed to mounted at the jack, and there is leakage on the board, but that's very unlikely with the PCB in that amp. So shoot me an email, info@sonicaudio.com. I'll look into that, Peter. That's weird. I'd love to follow up with you on that. That's weird. And now we're back to when I was talking about silent plugs. All right, we are at the third hour. I'm going to try to, we're almost to the end of the stuff that's here, so I'm going to scroll down, try to answer any quick questions that I can. And make sure there aren't any other outstanding super chats. So I'm reading as I go. Schwartz, NW, ballpark costs for reliability tone costs for AC15 hand wired. Oh, that's about $450, $500, depending on whether it needs. That's the total package. With new iron. Oh, good. So transformers, you're looking at almost $1,000 on that. I don't think all that's necessary. I mean, I do an awful lot of things which I do think are necessary, but I don't think you need to change all the iron unless one's got a fault. Let's see. The custom class AC15 custom classic F rods. I don't like the custom classic AC15. It is a very different circuit than the others. It's a plate follower. It doesn't have a cut circuit. It's really bright. So I would not recommend the AC15CC. I love the AC15C, but it's very different. Trying to get through anyone in Boston or New Hampshire. Maybe Brad will have. Brad's got access to our mutual database. I can't. Let's see. Pre-war can't find a 2 meg audio pot for a 65 Falcon. See if you can find there are 2 meg audio pots out there, but if you add a resistor to a 1 meg, then you're not going to have the full range of the pot available. It gets tricky finding old stuff that'll work. You know, you can get a 3 meg, but it's usually reverse audio, et cetera, et cetera. Victories are okay, Alan. They sound pretty good. They don't always. They're not always the best as far as service, but they're probably not that likely to need service, except every 15, 20 years. Oh, it just jumped on me. Let's see. Hey, Keith, thanks for joining us. Of course, I see this probably after he's already left. He's on his way to an acoustic jam, which is a good place to be. Good way to spend the night. 2006 Gibson Southern Jumbo. Oh, mine's a 1999 Southern Jumbo, Keith. So neener. I have to have a Southern Jumbo Watch Fest. All right. Thanks, Studio 5. And so you got the AC50. All right, so you got a tremolo stopped working. The power switch got really hot. Amp is baby did not abuse. The power switch getting really hot. That's unusual. You're going to take that to a tech. The power switch should not get hot, but it's possible that the power transformer's got a problem. Even a good design in current production, there can be occasional duds. Get that checked out. The tremolo stopping working would not cause the power switch to get hot, but a problem in the power transformer could cause both things. I'm sorry to be the potential bearer of bad news. Let's see. What's my favorite hot sauce if I have one? I like Crystal in Louisiana for an American kind of thing. And I really, really like the peri peri sauce that we had in Lisbon. I'm still trying to find one I like as well. The Nando's is pretty damn good. It's not as good as what I had in Lisbon, but I have not gone too crazy ordering peri peri sauces. The one that Kroger had was also quite good. The Kroger Organic Premium Select, whatever they call their high-end stuff. But I love peri peri sauce, and I like Crystal, followed by Louisiana. And if I have to, I'll use Tabasco. I'm not as much a fan of that. It's just it's a little too sweeter than I want. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Sorry. I don't know if Keith is still here. Josh Roberts. I used to have an Alvarez Yari. I had the real one. The high-end one. It was a HD 28 copy. I love that guitar. It was fantastic. It was built just like a real good Marshall. I mean, not Marshall, Martin. So I'm talking while reading. And it fell off a wall from a badly installed wall hanger and shattered to a million pieces, like my heart did that day. I think I was 19 when that happened. I've never really recovered from that. I'm still talking about it to my therapist. But I have a what do you call it? Eastman HD 28 copy, which is, I think, every bit as good as the old Yari Alvarez Yari, and better than a lot of current production Marshalls I have played. And I've played some fantastic Marshalls, but they sure charge an awful lot for the really good ones, and at that point, I might as well pay a little bit more and get a lot more with a Bourgeois or a Collings. My 2 cents. But the Eastman acoustics are fantastic. Eastman even has a collaboration with Bourgeois, which is high end for Eastman, but much less than other Bourgeois. Phenomenal guitars. Let's see. All right, we're getting more questions, and before I can catch up, we're getting more. And I love that everyone's so invested in this, and I would love to answer all your questions, but I can only do so many each week. We've gone just over 3 hours now, and I've answered Kevin O'Connor Tuck questions before. Overall, I think they're good. I think there are some potential gotchas, but I'm not sure if some of those gotchas have been fixed in subsequent editions. So I think it's time to sign off. I need to have more coffee, because we all need to have more coffee. I got to clean up the old coffee first on the floor, and did not land on an amp, just on the floor. So everyone have a good week, and I'll see you soon.